you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 15th part of What If Deku Finds Ben's Watch Ultimatrix. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Ben, get down. Ben, as forearms, turned what had been a headlong charge into a roll, just in time to avoid a claw that would have blindsided him. Before he could retaliate, a spinning wheel of water sliced the monster's arm off. It had already been badly burned, and that final injury was just enough to kill it. Thanks for the save, Korra, he called out, even as he punched another monstrosity. The current avatar tried to laugh at how nonchalant he was, but they'd been fighting these things, monsters that made the worst spirits look like baby turtle ducks, for days. She was exhausted, everyone was, but they had no choice but to keep fighting. Most of Republic City had been destroyed, and no one was willing to give up the rest. You know, this is almost normal for me, Ben said, and then turned into Heat Blast. He blasted one abomination with fire from one hand, and then tossed more to Korra with his other to boost her firebending. The entire world is coming to an end. How is this normal? Ben shrugged. That happened at least every other month back home. Just roll with it, and you won't get gray hair before you're 20. This time, Korra's laugh was more genuine. Yeah, or I'd be bald, like Tenzin. I'm shaven, and you darn well know that. Korra's airbending teacher shouted indignantly. There was a collective flinch from the defenders as the wound in the sky tore open further, and more monsters fell towards them. This time, it looked like several thousand, the worst wave yet. We're not getting out of this, are we? Korra asked, oddly serene in the face of certain death. Ben sighed. Not without a miracle. We just have to hold out until then. Korra nodded wearily. Then her eyes began to glow with the power of the avatar state. Then we fight and we hope. Let's do this. Jen and Kevin didn't so much arrive at their destination as they splashed into it. Kevin in particular landed face first into the salt water. He coughed and spluttered as he got to his feet. Well, that sucked, he complained. Could have been worse, Jen said, even as she shook water out of her hair. It could have been deeper than 6 inches, and you would have drowned. Kevin gave her the flattest stare in history relative to several universes. Tell me you didn't just tempt fate. Jen sighed. Yeah, okay, when things go wrong, you can blame me. I already am. Kevin pointed to the crack in the sky. He knew from experience that it was only a matter of time before Vilgax's army poured into this universe. Does your Ben ever do stuff like that? Mom says he doesn't do it as much as he used to, but Dad's about 30 years older than your Ben, so he's had time to learn. Kevin laughed. And it only took him 30 years. Good for him. Hey, is he still wearing that jacket? I think he gets a new one every 5 years, but he's got the original in a box somewhere in the attic. Of course he does. Hey, it was a gift, of course he held on to it. Right? Kevin looked around and raised an eyebrow. 3 guesses where we're supposed to go, and the first 2 don't count. The duo had landed in front of a large city, ringed by massive walls. The entire city was decorated with coral, shells, and statues of sea life and amphibians. This place is kinda cool, Jen said. Reminds me of Atlantis, but it isn't underwater. Just soggy. Kevin blinked. Atlantis is real. On my Earth, yeah, I commuted there for a while when I was dating Aquagirl. I thought you were dating someone named Bonfire. Now I'm dating Bonfire. Aquagirl got married 6 months ago to Lagoon Boy. Kevin rubbed his eyes. I feel like I need to start writing all these names down. Don't worry about it too much. If we pull this off, you can go home and pretend none of this ever happened. Will that work? Probably not, so I suggest looking up a good therapist. Jen started walking to the gate of the city. Come on, let's get this done before the world ends. It took longer than Kevin would have liked to walk to the city's entrance, simply because the water and silt kept pulling at his feet, but he managed to make it without losing more of his dignity. Jen drew back one fist and banged on the gate with the force of an unenthusiastic battering ram. Am I wrong to hope we don't run into a bunch of fish people? Kevin asked. Hey, I happen to know several fish people, and only 2 of them ever tried to kill me, Jen said. By Tennyson reckoning, that's an all-time record. I'd say you were joking, but I know you're right. Kevin heard something rumble. I think the door is opening. Sure enough, the massive door slowly opened, and a hooded figure stepped out, their features hidden by a long cloak. "Greetings, visitors," the person said to New. "Wait a second, you're human." Kevin and Jen both jumped a little when the figure threw back her hood, revealing a human girl that couldn't have been older than 13. Her black hair was cut short, and her grin threatened to split her face. "This is awesome," the girl shouted, and held out her hand. "I thought only my friends and I had been transported to Amphibia. Hi, I'm Marcy Wu. Does this mean there are other ways to get from Earth to here? Did you find another magic music box? Hey, have you found my friends? We've been separated for months." Jen floundered for a moment, even as she shook Marcy's hand. "I honestly don't know if I can answer all of those questions. To keep it short, we were sent here from another universe to deal with that." Marcy followed Jen's pointing finger to the crack in the sky. "Oh, yeah, a lot of folks were getting nervous about that." She looked Jen up and down. "Cool outfit. Are you a superhero?" "Actually, yeah." Jen smiled. "People call me Ultra Girl." Impossibly, Marcy's smile grew wider. "That is so cool. I thought this would be a cool fantasy role-playing setting, but now we've got a whole multiverse that includes superheroes." "That's awesome. Hey, is that guy a superhero too?" Jen smirked at Kevin. "Nah, he's a part-timer at best." She gestured to the city. "Anyway, we have a mission." Marcy slapped her forehead. "Right, sorry, got excited. Come on, I can introduce you to King Andreas. If anyone can help you, he can." "Hey, that's perfect," Kevin interjected. "We were told to find a king to help us." Marcy grinned. "Oh, then you met the right girl. I just so happen to be a ranger in the Utopian Guard and a personal friend to the king. Not to brag, but I can get you a meeting without all the courtly proceedings." "Yeah, we don't really have time for that." Jen looked up when the crack in the sky got just a little bit bigger. "Then let's get this show on the road." Marcy led them into the city at a brisk jog. "Welcome to the world of Amphibia and the city of Newtopia." Jen quickly followed after her, but Kevin lagged behind so that he could empty the water from his shoes. "Nice place," he commented, and blinked when he saw the humanoid newts walking the streets. "Okay, I kinda figured from the name, but this is a little weird." Jen raised an eyebrow. "I know the kinds of aliens you met, Kevin. Giant newts shouldn't be too surprising." Marcy gasped. "Aliens? You mean you've been to outer space?" "Well, yeah," Jen admitted. "Actually, we're both half alien. My mom's a Kryptonian. And my dad was an Osmosian," Kevin added. Marcy's jaw dropped. "This is the coolest day of my life." Jen kept Marcy busy by answering her rapid-fire questions, while Kevin kept a wary eye on their surroundings. As much as he regretted how he'd obtained them, his skills as a criminal helped him plot out the best ways to escape, should things go wrong. So far, things seemed relatively easy, but Kevin had learned early on to never take things at face value. Marcy guided them to the palace at the center of Newtopia. Kevin wasn't surprised to see that every single door was huge. No matter the universe, palaces always seemed to have gigantic doors. What did surprise him was the small number of people he saw as Marcy led them inside. There were guards, in heavy armor and holding halberds, but only a handful of hooded newts going about their business. "So, is something going on?" Kevin asked. "I kind of figured that a palace would be busier." "Actually, today is busy," Marcy said. "Most of the advisors are in the libraries, trying to figure out what's going on. Still, the palace is usually on the empty side. King Andreas sends people all over Amphibia to fix whatever problems come up, and there are a lot of problems, like the giant snakes that try to eat people." Jen considered that. "Okay, yeah, that sounds like something that would keep a government busy." "I know, right?" Marcy grinned. "At least it's always exciting, like an MMORPG with new content every week." "I wouldn't know," Jen admitted. "My life is already crazier than any game." Marcy laughed. "Yeah, superhero stuff, I get it." She turned a corner and stopped. "Okay, here we are. The throne room is just past this door." Marcy waved at the two armored newt guards, who pushed the door open. "All right, let's get this show on the road." Jen and Kevin were about to follow her, when Marcy abruptly tripped on nothing and fell face first into the floor. Neither of the guards reacted with surprise, and the way Marcy quickly brushed herself off suggested she did that often. "How has this kid survived this long?" Kevin whispered. "I'm guessing she needs constant supervision," Jen whispered back. Marcy led the way into the throne room, where a giant of a newt, easily 20 feet tall, sat on his throne. He had blue skin and a gray beard, with purple armor over most of his body. On top of his head was a crown that looked to be made of coral. "Living crown," Jen muttered. "Looks like we've found it," Kevin said quietly. "But how do we get it from him?" "King Andreas." Marcy bowed. "May I introduce Jen and Kevin? They might be able to help us with that big crack in the sky." The enormous newt rose from his throne and stepped towards them. Each footstep shook the room. He loomed over them, his face impassive. and then leaned in close with a cheerful grin. "Hello there," he boomed, his deep voice rattling even Jen's bones. "I can't say I was expecting more humans today, but I suppose with everything going on, I should expect the unexpected." Marcy started bouncing on her toes. "King Andreas, these guys are from Earth, but not the one I'm from. How cool is that?" Andreas leaned back and put his hands on his hips. "Just like that multiverse thing you talked about, right? Now, that's interesting." He locked eyes with Jen. "I'd love to be more hospitable, but that weird thing in the sky is causing more than a little worry." "Is Marcy right? And you know what's going on?" "Actually, we're working on that with a few other people," Jen said. To keep things short and sweet, an old enemy of my dad's broke out of his prison, gained a scary amount of power, and is trying to destroy the entire multiverse. Andreas blinked. "That sounds not good." "It really isn't." Jen gave her best smile. "But we think we know how to stop it. We've got teams going to different universes, looking for artifacts that we can use to stop the bad guy and undo all the damage. And you think one of those artifacts is here, on Amphibia?" Andreas stroked his beard thoughtfully. "My ancestors did dabble in exploring other worlds, though that method has since become lost to us. But it's possible they brought back something without knowing its true worth." He tilted his head. "Do you have any idea what you're looking for?" "An emperor's mask, but some of our friends are already getting that one. Something called Time Unbound, and a living crown." Jen stared pointedly at Andreas' head. "We were sent here for that last one." Andreas raised an eyebrow. "I see." The first breath Midoriya took sent him into a coughing fit. The air was dirty and stale, like the entire planet was dead. Then again, going by the ruins and smog everywhere, maybe it was. It also didn't help that there were skeletons everywhere. More than a few still wore bulky armor and carried oversized weapons, as if they had died fighting. "I told you it was hyper-industrialized," Luther chided. "You should have transformed into something with more durable lungs." Midoriya glared at him. "You don't have anything keeping this stuff out. How come you aren't choking?" Luther smirked and tapped at his head. Instead of touching his face, his finger stopped an inch away. "I have a shield around my head that filters out anything harmful. And I bet it stops you from getting punched in the face," Julie commented, safely within her own armor. Indeed, much to Ultra Girl's disappointment. Julie patted Midoriya on the back when he coughed again. "Maybe you should transform." "Maybe, but I only have an hour to stay as an alien," Midoriya said. "I might need to make every minute count." Julie frowned. "Hang on, let me try something." A portion of her shoulder disassembled and reassembled into a rectangular shape, with a tube extending from one side. On the other end of the tube was a face mask. "Put that on," Julie said. "My armor is recycling my air, but I built that to do the same for you." Midoriya hesitated, then put on the mask when he felt another cough building up. After a few deep breaths, he felt clean air passing through his lungs. "Just don't go too far away," Julie added. "I can't stretch the machine very far. If I do, I'll just transform," Midoriya promised, his voice muffled. "Now that that's settled, we should be on our way." Luther headed towards a distant building, the only one that had lights on. "What happened here?" Midoriya asked, if only because the dead silence was unnerving. "I didn't study this world very much," Luther admitted. "It was dead, and its technology wasn't that much different from my world's. In some areas, it was far more primitive. What I did learn was that this world was named Sira, not Earth, and its human inhabitants often went to war, first with each other, and then some other species that attacked them. That last one ended in their mutual destruction." "Sounds like you studied it more than a little," Julie observed. Luther scoffed. "There was nobody left to stop my probe from downloading history files off their computers. I read a brief overview and didn't go further. I only spouted that much because I have a photographic memory." Julie flinched, and Midoriya looked at her. "What's wrong?" "Ben had a photographic memory," she said quietly. "He was bragging about it a few hours before everything went wrong." "Then I pity him," Luther said gruffly. "Being able to relive the worst moments of your life with perfect clarity is not a quality to be desired." "Something you're familiar with?" Julie asked. "Yes, but it wasn't until recently that I was troubled by my past actions." Luther actually looked shamefaced for a moment. "It's hard to justify causing so much suffering when you have nothing to show for it. The few times I came close to getting what I wanted, I ended up losing it in the end. And that's why you agreed to help us." Midoriya raised an eyebrow. "A guilty conscience." Luther chuckled. "Nothing so bland. I'm known across my Earth for terrible things, and I'll be executed for my crimes. If I'm going to be remembered for the harm I caused, then I should also be remembered for the time I saved the entire multiverse. That's my best revenge against the people determined to see me vilified for all time." "Ah, so this is all for your image." Julie shook her head. "I think I'm starting to see why Jen hates you so much." "Oh, that's because I killed her brother," Luther dismissed. She really needs to get over that. Julie glowered, and her arms morphed into cannons. Luther responded with a pair of cannons that curved over his shoulders. Okay, enough. Midoriya glared at them. We need to focus on this mission, and you two aren't helping. This needs to be done fast. We go in, see how much damage we can do to slow Vilgax's operations, and then we leave. We can't do that if everything either of you says starts a fight. Luther sneered, but backed down first. Very well, boy. You lead the way. Midoriya would have, but he was still connected to Julie's armor and she was still glaring at the old man. Julie, we need to go. If we don't pull this off, we might not have a multiverse to restore, and that means we can't bring back your Earth. He hated manipulating Julie like that, but he needed to keep everyone focused. Half the team was only willing to fight because they were still looking for a way to save their loved ones. If Midoriya couldn't keep them in line, none of them would have families to get back to. All right, Julie said quietly. Let's get this done. The entire time they'd been speaking, Kevin had been watching Andreas carefully. Years spent among hardened criminals and being one himself had made him aware of all the signs of a con artist. Andreas was lying about something, and he was doing a good job of hiding it. His interest in their cause seemed genuine, as did his desire to end the threat. But there was a calculating gleam in his eyes. Kevin recognized it from many of his former associates. Whatever Andreas was doing, he was determined to be the one with the most to gain by the end of things. But there was also a limit to what he would play along with. No, gone was the jolly tone and curiosity. Instead, there was a dark and threatening voice with glaring, bitter eyes. There's a lot I'll do, but my crown is not something I'll part with. Marcy was taken aback. King Andreas, what if? They may be from another world, but I know thieves when I see them. Andreas crossed his arms. That crack in the sky might very well be an elaborate ruse, an illusion to help them trick us into doing what they want. Impressive, to be sure, but fooling an entire city to make off with a king's crown is just petty. Kevin sighed. So, you're not gonna hand it over? Not on your life, kid. Jen pinched the bridge of her nose. Okay, let the record show that we tried diplomacy, but we are now out of time. She pointed at Andreas. Last chance. Hand over the fancy hat, or we take it by force. Andreas sneered. Are you threatening me, little girl? Jen raised an eyebrow, and then grew to several feet taller than Andreas. Who's little now? Andreas responded with a wicked right hook to Jen's face. The strength of the blow was considerable, and shook the entire throne room. It also barely made Jen turn her head. Please tell me that's not all you've got, Jen said. I didn't come all this way because I thought it would be easy. Kevin started to move to help Jen, not that she seemed to need it, when he heard a click behind him. He turned, and saw Marcy aiming an arm-mounted crossbow at him. What are you doing? Marcy grimaced. Look, I don't know what's really going on, but Andreas is my friend. He's wise and strong, and I trust him. Maybe he's overreacting, but I'm not going to let you take something important from him. Kevin sighed. You need better friends. Marcy fired her crossbow, but Kevin ducked under the bolt and placed his hand on the stone floor. In a moment, he was covered in the same stone, just in time for another bolt to deflect off his head. He sighed again, and then charged at Marcy. She flinched and raised her arms to protect herself from Kevin's punch. Clang! That did nothing but deflect off the armored gauntlet that blocked him. Standing between him and Marcy was a female newt with pink skin and blonde hair. Her silver armor was ornate and decorated with medals, and her psychotic grin was unnerving for Kevin. Thanks for the save, General, Marcy said. We need to beat these guys and help the king. No problem, Marcy. The newt raised her hands, and a pair of hooked claws popped out of each vambrace. Now, intruder, you face General Yunin, scourge of the Sand Wars, defeater of Ragnar the Wretched, and the youngest newt to ever achieve the rank of general in the Newtopian army. Name yourself, so I know what to label your head after I put it on my wall. Kevin cracked his knuckles. Kevin Levin. Yunin blinked. That's it. Come on, kid. I gave my own epic introduction and everything. What do you want? I never even finished high school. Kevin's fists transformed into hammers. Now come on. I don't have all day. By then, Marcy had reloaded her crossbow, but the second bolt was as ineffective as the first. Yunin was fast, far faster than Kevin, and avoided his heavy swings. She slashed him across the chest, and her sharp claws sliced through his stone shell, but it managed to keep his skin from getting cut. Nice claws, Kevin said, and got in close so he could grab Yunin's wrist. I hope that armor is just as good. By the time Yunin figured out what he was talking about, Kevin had absorbed her armor. Now, he looked like a silver statue of himself. Oh, crud, Marcy breathed. Kevin hurled Yunin across the throne room, but before he could get to Marcy, he was nearly crushed when Andreas landed next to him. Izzy, Jen, Kevin shouted. Hey, I missed, didn't I? Jen shrank down to her normal size. Just grab the crown and let's get the heck out of here. Kevin reached for the king's head, but Marcy stood in front of him, arms outstretched. Kid, you really need to get out of the way. I'm not going to let you rob the king of Amphibia. Jen sighed and plucked off one of her earrings. You don't have a choice. Sorry about this. Jen flicked the earring at Marcy's feet, and the seeds sprouted into large vines that quickly had Marcy trapped. One down, Jen said. Take care of yours, and we'll go. Kevin's eyes went wide. Look, that was the only warning Jen had before Andreas smashed her aside with his tail. She flew into the opposite wall with enough force to shatter the stone. Andreas rose to his full height and drew what looked like the hilt of a sword. You really know how to annoy me, don't you? With a flick of Andrea's wrist, the hilt sprouted a blade of orange energy. But I haven't had a chance to use this thing in a long time, so I guess there really is a silver lining. Huh? Kevin's hands transformed into curved blades. I really hope the others are having a better time than we are. So, of all the worlds in the multiverse, why did Vilgax come here? Julie asked. Luther shrugged. From what I understand, he was extremely cautious after escaping the Phantom Zone, even with his power. This world was already dead, which meant no one was likely to look for him here, at least for a while, and this planet had enough materials lying around for him to get started on his plans. Stealing the materials, or building his own facilities from scratch, might have drawn unwanted attention, but it's far harder to detect the modification of such places that already exist. You say that like you've done this before, Midoriya said, his tone slightly accusatory. Luther raised an eyebrow at him. I spent most of my life committing crimes and not getting caught. They'll be finding evidence years after I'm gone. Compared to me, Vilgax is as subtle as a drunken ox. That's not as endearing as you might think, Julie said. It wasn't meant to be. I can admit that I've done terrible things to achieve my goals, just as I can admit that I will do terrible things to save the multiverse. Guys, Midoriya pointed. The doors are opening. The trio ducked behind the burned-out remains of a tank as the doors to the facility ground open. A skittering thing with too many joints and not enough muscle crawled out and began inspecting several human skeletons. It picked up a skull and rotated it in 3 hands, then tossed it away with a screech. It held up another skull, but this one was more to its liking, and it tucked it into a bag. Apparently satisfied, the creature began crawling back to the doorway. That guy seems to know where he's going, Julie commented. Maybe we should follow him. Midoriya nodded. At least until we get through the door. The 3 quickly but quietly followed after the creature and managed to slip inside the facility before the doors closed. As soon as he was inside, Midoriya noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air felt cleaner before he even tried to breathe. He pulled off the breathing mask and inhaled deeply. It's a lot nicer in here, he whispered. I imagine so, Luther said. If you plan to create living creatures, even the abominations we've seen, you need a clean environment to get the desired results. Julie shrugged. Makes sense. Where do we go now? I'll need access to a computer. If I can get into their systems, assuming Vilgax has a linked network, I should be able to find everything we need. Luther raised an eyebrow. After that, I assume it will be a simple matter of destroying everything we can find. You can manage that, yes. One of Julie's hands morphed into a pneumatic hammer. I think we can handle it. Midoriya turned into Diamond Head. I'll take point. Julie, watch our backs. Luther, you know what we're looking for, so you stay between us to stay safe. Luther actually seemed a little bemused. All right, if you insist. Just make sure you know where we're going. Diamond Head's arms became curved blades as he looked at the winding corridors. This place looks like a maze, and we might not have time to get this done if we get lost. Luther nodded, and a holographic screen appeared in front of his face. A moment later, he pointed to his left. I'm picking up higher levels of energy that way. That would be our best bet to finding a computer. Diamond Head remained tense every step of the way. The tall, shadowy corridors reminded him of every scary movie Takoyami had tried to get him and his class to watch. Usually, Midoriya gave up after the first couple of murders. I just hope things don't end up like those movies, he thought. The trio stuck to the shadows, but their caution was unwarranted. Despite how busy it had seemed from the outside, there was no one to stop them. How long have we been here? Julie whispered as they walked. Only 20 minutes, Luther answered calmly. It feels like longer. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Think rationally and you'll be fine. Easy for you to say, Julie muttered. Luther shrugged. I've faced death more times than I care to remember. A dark house is nothing compared to Darkseid. Diamond Head frowned. Isn't that the guy who killed Ken? Twice, if you count the time travel. Luther sighed. Yes, he did. And though his family may never forgive me, I do regret the role I played in his death. Like I said to the girl, I have rules, and I broke them in service to worse people than me. Is this you being repentant? Julie asked. Because you're not doing a good job. Luther smirked. Oh, I'm not repentant. I just don't want the world to remember me solely as a villain. If anything, I'll go to my execution with a smile, knowing that all my enemies owe their continued existence to me. It's nice to know that Jen's opinion of you is justified, Julie said with a glare. You really are awful. Focus, Diamond Head warned. We can't save anyone if we keep this up. Julie fumed, but Luther nodded in approval. The tense moment abruptly ended when they rounded the next corner and saw a massive door before them. It was open, and an eerie orange light punched through the shadows around the entrance. I think we found it, Diamond had said. Yeah. Julie looked at Luther. Now what do we do? First, I access a computer, and you two make sure nothing happens to me. Luther paused. Or the computer I'm using. I can't do my part if you heroes smash it apart. Julie rolled her eyes, but didn't retaliate. All right, Ben, let's do this. Diamond Head blinked. Did you just call me? Izuku, Julie said forcefully. I said Izuku, let's do this. Julie didn't allow for any further comments, and pushed ahead into the lab. Diamond Head and Luther followed, and the former nearly froze at the disturbing sight before him. Each wall of the lab was lined with large pods of transparent material, and inside each pod was a monster of Vilgax's creation. The monsters grew at an impossible rate, going from lumps of flesh to fully grown abominations in a matter of minutes. When they were finished, the pods moved through an open portal in the floor, and a new row took their place, filled with fluid and gray material. This is really gross, Diamond Head muttered. Julie nodded shakily. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to eat tonight. Or ever. Luther barely raised an eyebrow at the sight. Not bad. The process is efficient, but the end product clearly needs work. They seemed pretty tough when we fought them, Diamond Head said. But you still prevailed, which means they aren't good enough. Luther pointed. There's a computer terminal over there. I shouldn't have any trouble breaking the encryption assuming you two don't wake the children from their nap. You're the one who clanks when he walks, Julie hissed. Still, she carefully followed after Luther and took up a protective posture behind him. Diamond had cautiously approached one of the pods, but didn't dare touch it. He'd seen enough movies to know that that was a bad idea. Still, he couldn't help but stare as the occupant grew from a fist-sized lump of organic material into a familiar monster. How are they being made so fast? He asked. They were designed for fast growth, Luther said absently. From these files, it seems that whoever Vilgax has working for him crafted the DNA to grow as quickly as possible, and the material was then given a hyper cocktail of nutrients and steroids. It's a good thing they don't feel pain, because growing that fast would be agonizing. Julie glanced at him. What are you looking for in their systems? The best way to sabotage their efforts. This facility is too large to outright destroy, but maybe aha. Diamond had hurried over. What? Did you find something? Luther smirked triumphantly. I thought as much. Creatures like these have to be exactingly crafted. Even the smallest alteration to their growth formula will destabilize them, and I now know where that formula is created. The system is automated, so all we have to do is reprogram it, and it could take weeks before anyone discovers the reason for why Vilgax's army has become a giant puddle. Can you do that here? Diamond had asked. No, the systems are separated. Luther tapped the terminal in front of him. This is for final review and deployment, but it can lead us to where we need to go next. Julie smiled. Wow, this is easier than I thought it would be. This is harder than I thought it would be, Jen admitted, even as she punched Andreas in the face again. Oh, really? Kevin grabbed a newt guard by the helmet and threw him into wall. I couldn't tell by the army of guys trying to kill us. Complaining isn't helping. Jen sidestepped Andreas' next swing of his sword. And would you stop that already? Not on your life, kid, Andreas growled. How about your life? Jen shrank back to her normal size, rolled behind Andreas, and punched the back of his knee. Because if we don't get that crown, we're all gonna die. Andreas fell to one knee, panting heavily. If you think I'll believe that nonsense, you're even crazier than I thought, says the giant newt. Jen drew back her fist, but paused when she heard what sounded like tearing fabric. What was that? As if in answer, several of the two-armed abominations burst through the wall to the throne room, shrieking as they charged. Marcy, who had been struggling to escape Jen's vines for the last few minutes, went wide-eyed. What the heck are those? What we were trying to stop, Kevin shouted, and tackled one monster. He punched it in the face, but was then grabbed and hurled aside. Jen didn't give it a chance to finish him off. She activated her Ultimatrix, and all but vaporized it with her heat vision. She then slammed another's head between her hands with enough force to change its state of matter from a solid to a liquid, and threw its remains at a third. Kevin used the opportunity to finish it by cutting its head off with an arm-turned sword. We need to go, Kevin said. If those things are here, then there's nothing we can do to save this world in time. Hey, Marcy looked more than a little sick. You just beat those things, why can't you help us? Jen looked at Kevin for an answer, though she didn't expect to like it. We beat 3 of them, he said. Imagine a few million, they never stop, they never show mercy, and they're always angry. My Earth had lots of powerful tech, and one of the best heroes I've ever met, and we didn't even last a full day. You guys won't last an hour. All we can do is try to finish our mission, Jen continued, more gently than Kevin. If we succeed, we can undo everything that's happened, but we won't win if we get stuck helping every world we go to. I'm so sorry. Paradox, we're ready to go. Jen closed her eyes and waited and waited. Paradox, you, turn your phone off or something. Kevin frowned. Has he ever not answered when you need him? Jen shrugged. Don't ask me, this is the first time I've worked with him. Then this is really bad. Andreas growled as he got back to his feet, while even more of Vilgax's monsters arrived. Jen sighed. And it's about to get worse. The main laboratory is just up ahead. Lothar pointed to a massive door, decorated with a hollow gear symbol. All we have to do is adjust the genetic algorithm, and we'll be done here. You make it sound so easy, Julie said. I'm a straight A student, and I don't even know where to start changing a genetic algorithm. I'd be surprised if you did, Lothar said, his voice only slightly taunting. Even I needed a few weeks of study before I understood the process. He paused. Also, you're only 17, so I'd be even more surprised if you understood. Can we just open the door? Diamond had asked. I've only got about 40 minutes left before I have to let the OMNITRIX recharge. Lothar nodded and tapped a button on the wall. Just as the doors began to open, a long, spindly arm reached through and flailed about. It swatted Lothar to the floor, then grabbed Julie's arm and tossed her aside. The monster the limb belonged to staggered out. It was bigger than the ones Midoriya had faced before, and had several mechanical sockets in its body and tubes that trailed behind it. Diamond had reacted immediately and charged. One hand turned into a wide blade, while the other fired a barrage of crystals into the creature's hide. The monster shrieked, more in rage than pain, and slammed Diamond head face first into the floor. The hand it used was then abruptly torn apart as the spikes on Diamond Head's back turned into a massive crystal cone. He rose to his feet and tackled the unbalanced abomination. It opened its mouth to scream again, but Diamond Head shoved his arm blade into the roof of its mouth and into its skull. No, a reedy voice screamed. That was my favorite creation. Wait a second, Julie said as she got to her feet. I know that voice. The 3 of them entered the lab. It was enormous and filled with everything from microscopes to large vats of bubbling liquid, and found a man inside. He was thin, with thinning gray hair, and he looked like he hadn't shaved in several days. He wore a ragged lab coat over equally ragged clothes, cracked goggles, and what looked like a colander on his head. Dr. Animo, Julie asked. You know him? Diamond had asked. He was one of Ben's first bad guys, Julie said, but she sounded uncertain. But I don't remember him looking like a crazy hobo the last time I saw him. Animo flinched. Ben, as in Ben Tennyson. He's not here, is he? He pointed at Diamond Head. It's you, isn't it? Tennyson, you tracked me all the way to this dead world, just to ruin my work yet again. Lothar raised an eyebrow. I don't think he's the person you know. Probably from another universe. Diamond Head nodded. Yeah, and he's terrified of Ben Tennyson. Good, that works out well for us. Lothar nudged him forward. Keep him busy while I take care of things. Stay back. Animo backed up and nearly tripped over a cable. I'm warning you, I am not to be trifled with. Yeah, you kind of are, Julie commented. You're a C-list villain on a good day. As pale as he was, Animo's reddening face was easy to see, even in the dim light of the lab. Phew. Diamond Head saw the prongs on the colander hat start to glow, and moved, rather than shoot at them. There was a roar in the back of the lab, and a frog the size of a tank hopped over. That's not what I was expecting, Diamond Head admitted. Julie blinked. Ben told me about the frog, but actually seeing it is really weird. Just deal with it, Lothar snapped, and headed to a computer. I have work to do, right? Diamond Head fired a few shards at the frog, which hopped over to Animo. Julie, I'll keep them pinned, you take them down. Got it. Julie's arms turned into multi-barreled cannons, and she opened fire on the frog, now bearing Animo on its back. Midoriya took a moment to analyze the situation. The mutated frog was fast enough to avoid Julie's fire, but it clearly wasn't tough, or it wouldn't need to dodge in the first place. It could hop all the way to the high ceiling, and bounced off the walls. He was reminded of Asui, though this frog was far uglier. However, he had sparred against Asui, and he knew all her weaknesses. He turned into Heat Blast, but rather than throw waves of intense fire, he simply increased his own temperature. The metal floor directly under him began to glow and warp, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. The heat quickly dried out the frog, and it collapsed in a heap. Animo tried using his helmet to force the mutant to move, but it could only manage a weak twitch before dying. Midoriya made a mental note to apologize to Asui for inspiring him to kill a frog. "Thanks," Julie said, and stomped over to a terrified and slightly dehydrated Animo. "I need to work on taking down moving targets." Wait. Animo held out his hands. "Please, don't kill me." Julie grimaced. "I'm not going to kill you. We're the good guys." With a quick punch, she knocked him out. "We're done here," she said. "Luther, how's it going?" "Just finishing up." Luther stepped away from the computer and smirked. "I expect that production will resume in a few days, maybe a few weeks, but we've bought the multiverse a little more time." Bless smiled. "Great, then we just need to get out of here." "Not so fast, boy, there's still one loose end to tie up." In a swift motion, Luther aimed one of his cannons and shot Animo through the head. Heat Blast almost threw up. Well, he wasn't sure what he would throw up, but he still managed to hold it down. As soon as that passed, he stormed over to Luther, a fireball in one hand. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. "You didn't need to kill him." "Of course I did," Luther argued. "Animo was capable of creating these things in the first place. Slowing down the automated production was one thing. But if the original creator could remember his original process, all our efforts would have been in vain." Heat Blast glared. "Heroes don't kill. I know that, which is why I killed him." Luther shrugged. "Look at it this way, our mission is progressing, and your hands are still clean. You should be thanking me." "You know we won't do that," Julie said, but sighed. "Izuku, it's like you said, we don't have time to argue." "I know." Still, Midoriya didn't back down. "Listen, Luther, I don't care if you're vital to this mission. If you pull something like this again, I will put you back in your cell myself." Luther laughed, much to Midoriya's fury. "Boy, you're a few decades too early to be threatening me." "Paradox, we're ready to leave." "I can see that." Paradox stepped out of the shadows and looked at Animo's corpse with a hint of distaste. "Quite unfortunate, but Luther's rationale is sound. Come, we must leave. I'm afraid that my powers have weakened significantly, and I have left Jennifer and Kevin in no small amount of peril." "Okay, this is getting ridiculous." Jen heaved another monster over her shoulder, then crushed its head with her foot. "Paradox is a time traveler. For crying out loud, by definition, he can't be late." Kevin didn't reply beyond panting heavily. He was too exhausted to do more than run and carry Andrea's crown, and it fallen to Jen to do the fighting. It had felt like hours, but it had really been less than 30 minutes since the attack on Utopia had begun. If so many people hadn't died in that time, Jen and Kevin would have been impressed at how quickly most of the city had been destroyed. As it was, they were barely keeping their horror in check. "Hey," Kevin said weakly. "Where's that girl?" "Marcy, right." Jen grimaced. "I don't know. I lost track of her after we left the throne room. I hope she's okay." "You know she's not." Kevin looked around at the destruction. "This is even worse than back home." Jen made sure there were no other monsters around and sat down next to him. "How bad was it?" Kevin made a noise that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "My house got blown up before my mom could finish calling me. We had the best tech the plumbers could give us, all our allies, it didn't matter. Most of the planet was on fire after just one day. This world doesn't have a chance." "Indeed, it doesn't." Paradox tried to appear composed, but he almost collapsed as he arrived in front of them, along with Midoriya, Julie, and Luther. "Our only hope is to complete our mission and restore the worlds Vilgax has destroyed." "Hey, cousin," Jen said, and waved at Midoriya. "Where'd you guys go?" "Vilgax's monster factory," Midoriya answered, but he sounded rattled. "We sabotaged it, so we've bought some extra time." Kevin rose to his feet and held up the crown. "Cool. We got our thing." "Excellent," Paradox said. "Mirio and Gwen have also completed their part, which means we only have one piece of the puzzle left." A deafening roar made them all tense, and a tower in the distance crumbled to dust. Kevin thought about Marcy, and how they were leaving at least one decent person behind. "Sorry, kid." "Yeah, go team," Jen said sarcastically. "Can we celebrate back on the Watchtower?" "Of course." Still, Paradox hesitated. "You all might want to get a little closer to me. My powers are diminishing at a rather alarming rate, and I'd rather not accidentally leave parts of you behind." Even Luther looked a little queasy at that notion, and huddled closer to Paradox. A moment later, they left the burning ruins of Utopia behind, and arrived safely at the Watchtower. As soon as they did, Paradox went limp, and was only spared hitting the floor because Julie caught him. "Is he okay?" Midoriya asked. "I think so," Jen said. "Physically, he's human, but Time Walkers follow all kinds of cosmic laws that make my brain hurt, and I think he's close to breaking a lot of them." For now, let's just find him a place to rest. Hey, guys. Midoriya turned and saw Tagada and Gwen nearby. Looks like everyone succeeded today. That's great, right? Yeah, I guess, Midoriya said as Jen carried Paradox away. We've got 2 of the artifacts we need, and we slowed down Vilgax. Tagada pumped a fist. That's what I'm talking about. We're on a roll. Midoriya shrugged as he sat down. Maybe, but we still need to stop all this, and we don't know what time unbound is. I was thinking about that, Gwen said as the rest of the team gathered. Does anyone know about any technology that can affect time? The only time-related tech I can think of is Paradox's old lab at Lost Soledad. On a planet that doesn't exist anymore, Julie cut in. The multiverse is infinite, Gwen countered. There's got to be a version of our Earth that has a Lost Soledad with a time gate. She's got a point, Jen said, and thought about it. There are a few different ways to travel through time in this universe, but none of them seem like time unbound. Anyone else have any ideas? Tagada and Midoriya shrugged helplessly, as did Kevin. Time is a constant, Luther said as he climbed out of his armor. It's supposed to be an unchanging thing, it's not alive. But it exists, and it exists to do one thing, and that's to move forward. For it to be unbound suggests that time somehow has a choice in what it does. My theory is that what we're looking for is no object, but a person with some control over time. Jen chewed that over for a moment. Well, I can't think of anything better. When Paradox wakes up, we'll run that idea by him, and maybe he'll narrow it down. Hey, for all we know, Paradox is time unbound, Tagada suggested. He's a time walker, Gwen said. He can see time, travel through it, and even move things and people through it, but he has no power over it. Tagada ducked his head. Oh, sorry. A groan caught their attention, and they turned to see Paradox sitting up on the cot Jen had put him on. Oh dear, that was dreadful. He looked at them. It seems we made it back in one piece. Any developments? You weren't out that long, Jen said. We were talking about time unbound, and we think it might be a person. Paradox tapped his chin. Interesting, you might very well be correct. I'll look into it and see what I can find. Luther nodded. And while you do that, I'll go over the files I took from Vilgax's computers. Midoriya blinked. When did you do that? The same time I was sabotaging the manufacturing process. Luther smirked. I can multitask. Oh, well, okay. Midoriya stood back up and brushed himself off. Everyone, get some rest while Luther and Paradox work. We may have to move out again soon. Later, after Midoriya took a short nap, he'd gone to get something to eat and ran into Jen and Julie. I'm surprised you saw Animo, of all people, Jen said with a short laugh. Last time I heard about him, he was in a nursing home and couldn't even go to the bathroom without help. Lucky you. Julie rolled her eyes. A few weeks ago, he tried to take over Washington with an army of giant bison. Sounds fun. For Ben, yeah, but Animo's process was unstable, and the bison, well, they pooped everywhere, and since they were 30 feet tall. Oh, gross. Yeah, I'm just glad we didn't have to deal with the cleanup. Julie spotted Midoriya and waved him over. Hey, Izuku, what's up? Nothing yet. Midoriya accepted the bowl of soup Jen got for him. Did Paradox or Luther find anything? I wish. Jen scowled. Paradox has been staring into space for the last hour, and Luther is taking his own sweet time. Is there something we can do to help? Jen sighed. As much as I hate to admit it, there are maybe 3 people in the multiverse that can help Luther, and none of them are available. As for Paradox, okay, I have no idea what's going on in that guy's head. Now it was Midoriya's turn to sigh. Okay, Julie nudged him. What's on your mind? I just feel like we're so close to fixing things, and we're stuck waiting. Midoriya shrugged. How about you? How are you doing, Julie? I've been better, Julie admitted. Hey, sorry for calling you Ben before. Jen winced. You did that. It's fine, Midoriya assured. It's not like you've met anyone else besides Ben who has an OMNITRIX, right? Still, he's gone. At least for now, and I can't make mistakes like that. Julie sighed. I feel like I'm going to have to apologize to Ben after we fix things. And I keep thinking you're talking about my dad, Jen muttered, and then tensed. Luther is on his way, and the others are with him. He sounds like he's in a hurry. Midoriya had to wonder what Luther's definition of hurry was, because he entered the commissary at a speed barely faster than a casual walk. Still, he was frowning and seemed slightly concerned. We have a problem, Luther said without preamble. You couldn't crack the files? Jen asked. What? No, that took me about 20 minutes. Luther scowled. I now know what Vilgax is planning to end the multiverse, and it's more devious than simple destruction. We've slowed him down, but not by much, and he's already making moves to counter us. Well, don't keep us in suspense. Gwen snapped, and pink energy crackled around her glowing eye. Lothar began to pace. It seems that Vilgax was aware of you all, and knew that you were the multiverse's champions. He thought he could defeat us early by conquering your world before Paradox could get to you, but he failed. Now, he's planning to hamper us by continuing to attack our homes. Jen rose to her feet. So he's coming here? No, not yet, Lothar said. He's still scared of your father, irrational though it might be. After all, he's strong enough to kill all of us with very little effort on his part. He looked Midoriya dead in the eye. He's sending the forces he has left to your Earth. He wants to complete his task without further interference. For a moment, Midoriya thought the room was spinning, and then everything snapped back into focus. Well, he's getting what he wants. I'm not going to stand by and let my home get destroyed. Don't be foolish, Lothar snapped. This is exactly what Vilgax wants. Tagada stepped forward, one for all flickering around him. Then we're not going to disappoint him. There is another reason why Vilgax wants your world destroyed, Paradox said as he slowly limped into the room. After much deliberation, I believe that the person that embodies time unbound exists there. Attacking your home is just a bonus. Midoriya met Lothar's gaze, his eyes were steely, and his breathing was even. Any further complaints? No? Then let's go. We have a world to save. Kakin, there's another one. I know, Deku. Bakugou spun on his heel and blasted another monster on its back. It wasn't dead, but as it scrambled upright, Midoriya incinerated it with his emerald fire. What the shit is going on today? I was hoping one of you heroes would know, Toga called out as she darted around a bleeding mess that had been another abomination. Hey, has anyone seen Shigaraki? Bakugou scoffed. Last I saw, that prick was turning one of these freaks into dust. Midoriya's flame horns flickered as he moved from one monster to another. How about we find him and the others after we survive? Another burst of heat washed over them, and they looked up just in time to see Heat Viper literally vaporize a dozen more monsters. Despite his hatred of his father, Midoriya was starting to get worried. An hour ago, Hisashi had been annihilating 100 at a time, but now he was too exhausted to kill more than a handful. If a powerhouse like Heat Viper was running out of steam, then this sudden invasion was worse than anyone could have predicted. I think we need to get out of here, Toga said nervously. No shit, Bakugou sneered, but even he couldn't hide his anxiety. Come on, let's find the rest of the class. The ground shuddered, and a building collapsed around a hulking specimen. It was easily 5 times the size of any other monster they'd seen so far. After we deal with that, Midoriya said mildly. Yeah, Deku, after that. Uraraka stumbled when she saw that her boyfriend was suddenly gone. What just happened? Before anyone could answer her question, a strange sound reached them. It sounded like tearing cloth and shattering glass all at once. An instant later, a gaping hole appeared in the air less than 50 feet away from them. A warp gate, Yaoyorozu shouted. Is it Kurogiri? Is the League of Villains attacking us? Everyone, get back. Vlad King ordered. Anyone who is too tired from today's exercise, fall back and call the other teachers. Everyone else will stay and hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Aizawa lowered his goggles over his eyes and readied his scarf as he stood next to his fellow teacher. I'll shut down any quirks, and you can knock them down. Got it. Vlad glanced over his shoulder and saw almost half the students heading further away from the potential battle. Damn, of all the times for the students to be exhausted. I know what you mean, but if we keep the enemy bottled up, then numbers won't matter. Aizawa scowled. But I'm worried about Midoriya. It can't be a coincidence that he disappeared and this portal showed up at the same time. Vlad laughed humorlessly. Even when he's not here, that kid is causing trouble. Aizawa smirked, and he felt a flicker of the satisfaction from a few minutes ago when his class had beaten Vlad's. You're just jealous you didn't get him. Oh, shut up, you scruffy hobo. That small attempt to keep the tension from getting overwhelming ended when a screaming tide of monsters barreled out of the portal. Some of them walked on arms instead of non-existent legs, or too many limbs, or mismatched wings. All of them had gray flesh that looked on the verge of rotting. Some bodies had spikes haphazardly erupting from them, and others had layers of hide. All of them produced a deafening wave of noise and the smell of rot and death. Aizawa had time to realize that these things couldn't possibly be Namu, but there was nothing else to consider. They were intruders with hostile intent. More importantly, they were intruders with hostile intent to his students, and he would die defending them if necessary. Just as he prepared to leap into battle, a golden blur tore past him, almost knocking him over by the passing shockwave. Tagada moved so quickly that Aizawa needed almost 3 full seconds to process that the third-year student was even there. More importantly, Togata proved that these enemies could be beaten when he crushed the skull of one with a fist encased in crackling golden energy. Another blur passed by, this one green, and Aizawa started when Midoriya, as Jetray, flew into the oncoming horde. He fired bursts of green energy from his eyes and tail, then transformed midair into Diamond Head to decapitate 3 monsters before he hit the ground. More bolts of energy crossed the air above him, some green, some pink, as unfamiliar people charged into battle. One was a red-headed girl that seemed to be midway through transforming into something pink, and 2 more a teenage girl, and an old man wore hulking suits of green armor. The latter 2 kept their distance, firing a variety of weapons into the crowd of monsters, while the redhead hurled a thin discus of energy that separated a monster from its arm. As it fell, another girl, Aizawa recognized her as BEN10's daughter, grew to almost 50 feet tall, and finished the thing off with a single stomp. The countercharge was courageous and devastating, but it wasn't enough to stop every enemy that poured through the hole in reality. One shouldered past the armored girl and roared as it charged at Aizawa. It was huge, bulging with muscle, and covered in spikes, including 2 that replaced its eyes. Aizawa and Vlad prepared to stop the beast, but a boy covered in metal ran past them to intercept it. At first, Aizawa thought it was Tetsu, but that student couldn't turn his metal arms into hammers, which this boy used to shatter the bony spikes on the monster's chest. Off balance, the creature couldn't stop the next blow from connecting with its chin, and it staggered back. Before it could recover, Diamond Head hurled a crystal javelin that speared it through the skull, and it collapsed. "We need to close the portal," Togata shouted. "Luther, I hope you got that gizmo working," the old man in the armor replied, but Aizawa didn't hear him. He was too focused on how Midoriya was fighting. Even against the 8 precepts, he had only used as much force as was necessary to stop an opponent. But here, he was clearly fighting to kill. There was a kind of desperate ferocity to every move, as if even the slightest misstep could spell disaster. Aizawa wondered what could have possibly triggered such a response, and the thought sent a shiver down his spine. Midoriya turned into Echo, and then transformed again. This time, he was taller, with blue skin and a more robotic face, and he floated a few inches above the ground. He raised his hands, and tunnels of raw sound tore a wide path through the mob, exposing the portal. Aizawa had seen Ultimate Echo in training before, but seeing him turn stone to dust was quite different than obliterating flesh. He had seen worse in his career, but it was still enough to turn his stomach. The old man, Luther, charged through the opening, and almost through the portal itself. 2 cannons unfolded over his shoulders, and began crisscrossing beams of energy across the portal, like a seamstress patching a hole. Aizawa realized that that was exactly what was happening, as the energy seemed to pull the portal closed, and it slammed together with a sound like crashing mountains. Jen shrank down to her usual size and crossed her arms. Green energy gathered where they met, and she fired a beam the width of a car in a sweeping motion that obliterated most of the remaining monsters. The few that survived were quickly finished off by Togata and Ultimate Echo. "How long do we have?" Midoriya asked Luther as he turned back to normal, ignoring his teachers and fellow students for the moment. "I'm not sure," Luther admitted. "I had less than 2 hours to come up with that modification, and no time to test it. At my best guess, perhaps an hour, and that's only in the immediate area. More breaches could appear anywhere, at any time." Aizawa took that moment to jump into the conversation. "Then perhaps you should explain things sooner than later." Midoriya looked up at him, and Aizawa got a good look at his face. He was exhausted. More than that, he was haunted in a way that Aizawa had only seen in veteran underground heroes. "We'll do what we can, Aizawa-sensei," Midoriya said tiredly. "Let's get somewhere safer. They have stopped one of our breaches." "So they have. It will only take a short while to open more. We do not have unlimited drones. They could stop us. Not before we deny them the final prize. Send them in. Leave none on that world alive." Yaoyorozu had been raised to be a proper young lady. From an early age, she had been taught to not act improperly, which included not gaping. After learning about the multiverse and the truth about quirks, she thought she never would. That changed after Midoriya's abridged retelling of his mission. And if the open mouths of most of her classmates was any indication, she wasn't the only one whose mind was blown. "I don't believe this, Deku," Bakugou said stubbornly. "You're telling me that you were picked to save the entire fucking multiverse. Save your disbelief for someone who cares," the old man, Lex Luthor, said with a sneer. "We're only telling you this out of courtesy, and because we don't need you getting in our way." Midoriya gave Luthor a warning look, then shrugged apologetically. "I'm sorry for not going into more detail, but we're running out of time. The only hope any of us has is if we find this time unbound." We're pretty sure it's a person on our Earth, and we need to find them. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose. Considering those things that attacked us, I don't have any reason to doubt you, especially if time is a factor. Still, we will discuss the fact that you essentially falsified having a quirk to enter this school. I fucking knew you were a fraud, Deku. Bakugou crowed, only for Zero to tape his mouth shut. Midoriya nodded, and Yaoyorozu felt a chill when she saw how little he seemed to care at that moment, either for Aizawa's threat or Bakugou's words. Clearly, this Vilgax was such a danger that Midoriya didn't care that his dream of being a hero was about to come crashing down. I can't think of any heroes with time-related powers, Aizawa went on, ignoring Bakugou. That kind of quirk is extremely rare. There was Stopwatch, but he died 20 years ago. Midoriya frowned. Stopwatch, he was a French hero, wasn't he? His quirk let him stop time on any person or object for up to 10 seconds. Does he have any children or relatives with a similar quirk? Despite everything, Yaoyorozu couldn't help but share a fond smile with her friends. Even in the face of the apocalypse, Midoriya's encyclopedic knowledge of heroes and quirks was second to none. Aizawa shook his head. Not that I'm aware of, but he could only use his quirk once every hour. That doesn't sound like time unbound. Good point. Midoriya turned to the others on his new team. Any ideas? The girl whose armor had morphed into a black and green bodysuit shrugged. Well, unbound largely means not held down by rules. Anyone on this planet whose powers don't have any rules regarding time. Midoriya shook his head. I can't think of any heroes who can do something like that, and the whole world would know if a villain had that kind of power. Yaoyorozu put her considerable intellect to work trying to come up with an answer. It was difficult, considering all she had learned in just a few minutes, and it took more than a little effort to get her brain going. It turned out that she didn't need to. Deku-kun. Uraraka's eyes were wide, and her voice was shaking. What about Eri? Midoriya was sitting down, but he suddenly lurched like he'd tripped. Oh god. Gwen looked at him. Who's Eri? Basically their adopted daughter, Tagada supplied, pointing to Midoriya and Uraraka. She can reverse time around any living thing she touches. Luther raised an eyebrow. How powerful is she? Midoriya began to tremble. She can bring dead things back to life, or rewind them out of existence. Kevin whistled. Well, I'd say that qualifies as time unbound. Where can we get her? Whoa. Ashido put her hands on her hips. Eri is only 6 years old. You can't just use her like a cell phone. Midoriya jerked back like he'd been slapped, and Yaoyorozu understood why. Just thinking about using Eri for anything would make him feel like Chisaki. If there was anyone Midoriya didn't want to be compared to, it was that monster. How about we just ask for her help? Tagada offered. We'll explain it to her as simply as we can, and we'll keep her safe while we work. An insistent beeping was suddenly heard from Luther's armor, and he looked at a holographic screen in front of his face. We may need to help her before she can help us. More breaches are forming. Where? Midoriya demanded. Luther looked him dead in the eye. Everywhere. The entire planet is being invaded this time. If we are going to retrieve this girl, we need to do so now. Midoriya took a breath. He looked at his team, and then at his classmates and teachers. Okay, we need a plan. Aizawa-sensei, can you hold off the enemy? Aizawa glanced in the direction of the dead monsters from earlier. The heroes and hero students should be able to keep them back for a little while. If your mission succeeds, will they go away? We're not sure, Jen admitted. If we're lucky, then yes. Worst case scenario, these things lose their reinforcements in their direction. That's good enough for me. Aizawa stood up from his seat. We'll begin lockdown procedures immediately. Anyone who can fight now will come with me, and we'll hold the entrances as long as we can before falling back. Those of you too exhausted or injured, get to Recovery Girl. Once she's fixed you up, assist Principal Nezu, and keep the other students calm. He looked at Midoriya. How long do you need to get the job done? I don't know, Midoriya answered. Professor Paradox used a lot of his energy to get us here in time, and it might be a while before he recovers enough to retrieve us. Wait a second. Kaminari raised his hand like he was back in class. You guys are just gonna bail after you get Eri. You're gonna leave us. We won't be gone for long, Jen said, trying to sound nonchalant. If things go right, we'll be back before you know it. Well, Izuku and Mirio will, the rest of us will go home. Oh, Kaminari tried to smile, but it was obvious he was on the verge of panicking. I'll guess we'll see you later, Midoriya. Midoriya nodded. Yeah, once we get back to campus, we'll only need a few minutes to pick up Eri. After that, we just have to hold out until Paradox gets us. The sound of breaches in reality began to echo through the air, and Aizawa shared a look with Vlad. All right, everyone on the bus, our first order of business is getting back to UA proper. Kevin sighed. Great, we've gone from our own spaceship to a school bus. It beats walking, Gwen said. Like that matters to you. You haven't set foot on the ground since we got here. Gwen frowned and looked down. Sure enough, her feet were a few inches above the ground. Huh, I didn't even notice. That's not good, Jen commented. You should really. She blinked when a piece of skin on Gwen's hand abruptly peeled off, revealing purple light underneath. Yeah, that's a problem. One for later, Luther reminded them. Ironically, time is not on our side. So, Sui cocked her head as she looked at Midoriya, saving the entire multiverse, ribbit. The blandness in her tone made Midoriya laugh. Why yeah, I guess it's a big deal. Zero smiled. And to think, a week ago, the scariest thing we had to deal with was the League of Villains. Well, they still are for the rest of us, Ashido cut in. But that's small potatoes for a big-time superhero like Midori, right? For a brief instant, Midoriya pretended that the bus ride was like any other, and he was just enjoying his time with his friends. The moment ended when he heard an inhuman roar in the distance, and he was reminded that there was a very real chance that his entire world was going to be destroyed in a few hours. The two classes were on their respective buses, making all speed for UA. Julie and Luther had opted to fly overhead, but the rest of Midoriya's team was crammed into the Wanna bus. Aizawa hadn't gotten off the phone since the ride started, rapidly talking to several people in a conference call. Midoriya wasn't sure who he was talking to, and didn't dare interrupt to find out. He was positive that one of them was Nezu, but he wasn't sure about anyone else. Hey, Deku-kun. Uraraka peered closely at him. You look exhausted. Are you okay? Midoriya shrugged. I haven't slept in a couple days. How could it? Oh, right, you mentioned time travel. Uraraka frowned. You could have left a note or something. It was weird when you just disappeared. To be fair, Ida pointed out, he returned a moment after he left. Yaoyorozu nodded. The benefits of time travel: you are never late for anything. Wait, I'm confused, Ashido said. If you guys could travel through time, how come you just didn't go back and find baby Vilgax and, well, Ashido made a rather impressive show of pretending to break a neck. Midoriya decided not to address that his sort of twin had just suggested he commit murder. Apparently, Vilgax exists outside of time now, just like Paradox. We couldn't change his history if we wanted to. Oh, why can't anything be easy? Because life sucks and then you die? Jen said curtly. She was staring out the window, her expression somewhere between bored and tense. The best we can do is grab what happiness we can before the end. That's morbid, Zero commented. It's the truth. I've seen some of the most twisted people in existence devote their lives to destroying as many innocent people as possible, and I've spent almost half my life trying to stop them. The only thing that lets me sleep at night is knowing that I was able to buy a few people at least one more day of life. She sighed. That's why I'm here now. That's why all of us are here, to keep a genocidal maniac from wiping out all life, at least until the next guy comes along and tries to do it all over again. Midoriya couldn't agree with her philosophy. There had to come a time when the bad guys finally gave up, and the good guys could relax. Maybe it was naive of him to think so, but the idea of a never-ending war between heroes and villains wasn't appealing to him at all. That might be how things are on Jen's Earth, but this isn't her Earth. This is my home, and I'm going to make it a better place to live. Midoriya flinched when he heard another roar in the distance. After we save it, anyway. Nezu listened to the report with what almost seemed like indifference. Of course, he already knew about people from other universes, and that Midoriya's quirk was a ruse. Judging by his reaction, Aizawa realized that Nezu had probably helped forge that ruse. Still, if there was anyone who could help plan a successful defense of the school, it would be Nezu. Begin escorting the students to the emergency shelters, Nezu said calmly. General Studies and Business course students first, followed by any support course students who don't want to assist in the defense. Any first-year hero course students are permitted to go to the shelters as well, but second and third years are required to stay outside. We'll need all the firepower we can muster. Aizawa, what kind of support can we expect from our expanded security roster? They're all retired heroes, but they can hold their own, Aizawa replied immediately. I'd like them to stay with the younger students. Their experience should help calm any nerves. Excellent. Nezu looked at his phone and sighed. I would have preferred to have more pro heroes and police help as well, but there are reports of monsters running rampant all over Japan. There's simply no one available to help right now. Then we'll just have to hold the line. Aizawa hesitated. At least until Midoriya's team can stop this invasion at its source. I have complete faith in him, Nezu said promptly. I'll explain the details of his situation later, but for now, we must focus on the present. Sometimes, Aizawa hated that Nezu could be even more rational than he could. Of course, sir. How are your students? Nezu abruptly asked. Some of them were quite exhausted by today's exercise, correct? They'll be able to fight, Aizawa assured him. S.H.I.E.L.D. recently created a kind of adrenaline pill that can keep someone in fighting shape for 6 hours that counteracted the side effect of Recovery Girl's quirk, so the students are as ready as they can be. Excellent news. Nezu paused. Is S.H.I.E.L.D. going to be in the shelters as well? No, she refused. Aizawa smirked. Last I saw, she and Hatsum were finishing a suit of power armor and arguing over who got to pilot it. Nezu chuckled. Oh, if this were any other situation. Yeah. The building rumbled, and Aizawa tensed. I'm going out there. Eraserhead. Aizawa stopped mid-turn. Remember, according to Midoriya-san, these monsters don't have quirks. Be careful. I'll do my best, but I won't hesitate if my students are in danger. With that, Eraserhead strode from the office. Nezu looked down and closed his eyes. That's what I'm afraid of. Iri ran up and hugged Midoriya's leg. What's going on? Everything's loud and scary. Midoriya knelt and gave Iri a quick hug. Sorry, Iri-chan, there's a lot happening right now. I know it's scary, but some friends of mine are working to make it stop. We're almost done, actually, but we need your help. Iri blinked. Me. Jen, standing behind Midoriya, waved and smiled. Yeah, we heard you had really special time powers, and that's exactly what we need to save everyone. But I don't know how to use my quirk yet, Iri said, her bottom lip wobbling. Don't worry, Midoriya assured her. We met this man, Professor Paradox, and he has time powers too. He can help you help us. That wasn't necessarily true, especially with Paradox's deteriorating condition. But it wasn't like any of them had any better ideas. Plus, Iri perked up at the thought of someone else having powers like her. Is that okay? She asked Uraraka, who hugged her. As long as Deku-kun keeps you safe, it'll be fine, she said, and gave her boyfriend a pointed "You'd better not let a single hair on our girl's head be harmed or so help me look." For his part, Midoriya emphatically nodded. The end of the multiverse scared him, but facing Uraraka's wrath if something happened to Iri was much worse. So, how long do we have to wait before this Paradox guy takes you away again? Zero asked as he absently adjusted his helmet. No idea, Kevin admitted. He's been getting weaker since this whole thing started. It could be hours. Let's hope not. Luthor cut in, staring intently at a hologram in front of his face. I've been monitoring the progress of the invasion thus far, and it's not good. Contact has been lost with 3 countries in the last 30 minutes, and casualties are already in the millions. Midoriya felt his gorge rise. It was one thing, intellectually, to know that whole universes had been wiped out by Vilgax, but it was another matter entirely when the same thing was starting to happen to his home. Hey, it's okay, Jen said, and gently elbowed him. We'll fix this, I promise. Why yeah. Midoriya smiled as he watched the rising stars play with Iri to distract her. I hope so. Deku, Eraserhead, was suddenly right beside him, and Midoriya jumped. I need you to come with me. The south gate has come under siege, and I need you to help keep the enemy out until we can reinforce the breach. We can help, Jen said, arms crossed. Eraserhead shrugged. Sure. Genesis, Cellophane, Alien Queen, you're with us. Everyone else will stay here and protect Iri. This whole mission fails if something happens to her. After a moment of discussion with the rest of Midoriya's team, Jen and Gwen decided to accompany the reinforcements. Midoriya headed to the south gate as XLR8, while Jen dragged the others on a floating mana platform from Gwen. By the time they arrived at the gate, things were already deteriorating. The sealed door was crumpled, and the 2 retired heroes guarding it were bloody and falling back. A screaming drone crawled through the breach. As soon as it saw the reinforcements, it charged. Midoriya acted first, turning into Diamond Head and throwing a crystal javelin into the monster's chest. Ashido sprayed it with acid a moment later, but other than burning away a few patches of skin, it ignored her. That changed when she upped the power of her acid for another spray that melted away one of its arms. Diamond Head finished it off with a quick stab to its head, then looked outside. We've got a bunch more coming in, he reported. At least 10, maybe more. Eraserhead nodded. Tennyson, you and Deku go out and hold them off for as long as you can. Genesis, do what you can to repair the door. Yaoyorozu bit her lip, but nodded and began studying the door mechanisms. Hanta, I may need you to hold things in place. No problem, Zero said, but underneath his helmet, he looked far less certain than he sounded. After a moment, Yaoyorozu began creating several different components from her arms, then directed Zero to replace the old parts with the new ones. While that happened, Midoriya and Jen held their ground, driving back or killing the handful of monsters that tried to get past them. The gate is repaired. Yaoyorozu called out. Izuku, get out of there. Jen stopped another drone with her cosmic ray, and covered Midoriya as they retreated back inside. Why isn't the gate closing? Yaoyorozu frowned. I repaired the lock, but I didn't have time to fix everything. We just need to get the gate closed, and it should stay shut. Jen sighed. Okay, give me a minute. She held out one hand, and with her magnetic powers, forced the gate to close. Izuku, can you weld this shut? It might buy us a few more minutes. Sure, Midoriya said, and turned into heat blast to heat the seams in the door into a solid piece of metal. Once the metal cooled, Zero reinforced it further with a literal wall of tape. It wouldn't do much. But in this siege, every second counted. Jen raised an eyebrow. So, tape? Yeah, what about it? Zero asked, his tone defensive. Nothing. Jen held up her hands. I'm sure tape is useful in a lot of situations. Zero grumbled, but didn't complain further. Enough, Aizawa ordered. We're pulling back now. Rest as much as you can. You may get called again at any time. Psst, Midori. Ashido pulled Midoriya aside so that they could speak privately as they walked. Look, I get that you're on a big time, save the multiverse mission thing. That's one way to put it, I guess. Ashido elbowed him. Shut up, I'm venting. Sorry. Anyway, I just wanted to ask. We are going to be okay, right? I mean, you guys have a plan. We know what we need, Midoriya clarified. But we haven't figured out how all the pieces come together yet. The sooner we get Eri to Jen's universe, the faster we can set this right. Cool. Ashido took a deep breath, then pulled Midoriya into a one-armed hug. This is why I'm so glad I decided to be your friend when we first met. Really? Okay, at first I was just interested because your quirk was so cool, she admitted. But then I saw how much of a lovable dork you are, and I couldn't stay away. MHA. Midoriya tried to pout, but couldn't. Instead, he returned the hug. Why does my sister have to be so mean? Part of the job, I've gotta poke holes in your ego, and keep you safe because you are a precious being. Midoriya blushed, but before he could try to come up with a witty comeback, the school shook again. The source felt much closer than before. Midoriya turned in the direction of the gate, but it still held. Jen, however, had super hearing, and knew exactly what was about to happen. Izuku, move. She was already starting to move when the ground underneath Midoriya's feet began to crack and break apart, but she was a beat too slow. Ashido, however, was not. She pushed Midoriya away, and gave him one last chance to look at her with wide eyes. Then a claw burst up from the ground. Mina, 7 casualties, Cementos reported grimly. 3 retired heroes, and 4 students when the monsters tunneled up from underground. Nezu nodded. Injuries, 31, and half of them are serious. Cementos' hands twitched, but he managed to remain composed. Recovery girl says that the serious ones will likely not last through tomorrow. Nezu's ear twitched. I understand. Have all our defenses been repaired? So far, but the breaches are occurring faster and faster. Cementos inclined his head. How is the wider situation? Deteriorating rapidly, Nezu answered. There isn't a single province in Japan that isn't under attack, and we've lost contact with half the country. The number of casualties is estimated at least 4 million. As for the rest of the world, we can't reach most of Europe. China has gone completely dark, and the only state in the US still holding out is Texas. So much devastation, so fast. Cementos put his hand to his head. It's unprecedented. Not even the worst villain attacks did so much damage. The good news is that it's happening too fast for people to fall into despair. Nezu smirked. Before we lost radio contact with them, Mirko and Hawks were leading a joint strike force of heroes, police and JSDF soldiers into several breach points. At least Mirko is taking this seriously enough to work with other people. Cementos tried to sound jolly, but it came off as hollow. How much time can they buy? We had some conflicting reports, Nezu admitted. Some civilians they managed to evacuate are saying they're still fighting, but a few claim Mirko is dead. We can't be sure of anything right now. What about Midoriya-san's plan? How is that progressing? Nezu sighed. Right now, he's not in any place to talk. He fights when he has to, but he hasn't spoken a word in hours. I'm not surprised. Cementos closed his eyes. Has he even washed her blood off yet? There hasn't been time. I hate this. Now it was Nezu that closed his eyes. He tried not to imagine a cheerful, pink face that would never smile again. So do I. Uraraka watched as yet another monster floated helplessly in the air, only until heat blast burned it to ash. She wished she could feel some satisfaction for helping to destroy over 30 of these things, but she couldn't feel anything at all. She'd only felt grief for the first hour after Midoriya, and Zero had brought back what was left of Ashido. After that, she'd gone completely numb. She wondered if she just hadn't accepted reality yet. Her other friends weren't doing much better. Zero couldn't stop shaking, and had needed a good 20 minutes alone to scrub off Ashido's blood, and then another half hour being held by a teary-eyed Asui to not have a complete breakdown. Like Uraraka, Yaoyorozu and Ida had grieved at first, but now moved forward grimly, only speaking when needed. Todoroki was the worst of them all. He now reminded Uraraka of how he'd been when they'd first met, as cold as his ice. At first, he had reached out and touched Ishido's remaining hand, as if he could magically restore her to life. When that had failed, he had locked up, not showing even the slightest hint of emotion. The only sign that he felt anything at all was when he marched to wherever Vilgax's monsters appeared and incinerated them. He pushed himself so hard that Eraserhead had been forced to shut down his quirk twice, and dragged him back to rest and recuperate. Throughout it all, he hadn't said a word. "How much longer do you think we need to hold out?" she asked quietly. Midoriya shrugged as he turned back to normal. According to Jen, she and Kevin needed to wait for almost 2 hours before Paradox showed up. "It's been 4 hours so far." "I know," Midoriya sighed. "Paradox has been getting weaker ever since this whole thing started." He didn't say it out loud, but Uraraka knew he was wondering if Paradox was going to show up at all. "I lost track of Mirio a while back," Midoriya continued. "Where did he go?" "He's still leading the defense by the south gate," Uraraka reminded him. "The third years are doing well, only a few injuries so far." "That's good. Nezu-sensei doesn't need to send them reinforcements yet." "Yeah, we need it more." Uraraka tried not to wince as she thought of the 1B students who had suffered crippling injuries during a skirmish an hour ago. Kendo had passed out from blood loss after losing a leg, Kamakiri was on a ventilator after one of his lungs had been destroyed, and Monoma was blind after a monster had torn off his face. Wana had been relatively luckier, with only minor injuries thus far other than Ishido. "We should head back," Uraraka said tiredly. "Our shift is over." "Yeah, okay." Midoriya was quiet as they walked back to the infirmary barracks, barely waving at their replacements, a team led by Takoyami. "We have to keep going," Uraraka reminded him. "It's the only way we're going to make Mina's sacrifice worth anything." "She wasn't sacrificed," Midoriya snapped. "She was murdered. I don't care if we fix this, I'm never going to accept losing someone I care about worth it." Uraraka tried not to flinch. Midoriya was barely holding it together at this point. He was blaming himself for Ishido's death and for the attack on their Earth. As far as he was concerned, if he hadn't agreed to help Paradox, none of this would have happened. Uraraka didn't believe that. From what she understood, Vilgax would have sent his army here sooner or later, regardless of what Midoriya did. "Izuku." Jen waved as they approached, and for the first time in hours, she seemed happy. "Good news. Paradox just showed up." Midoriya actually tripped, and Uraraka had to quickly tag him with her quirk to keep him from falling on his face. It reminded her of the first time they'd met, and it brought a fond smile to her face. "That's fantastic." Midoriya gave Uraraka a quick nod of thanks when she brought him safely down to his feet. "We just need to get Eri and we can finish this, right?" "That's the plan." Jen gestured for them to follow her. "Come on, let's get out of here." Uraraka had never seen Paradox before, but if she had been expecting an inspiring figure, she was sorely disappointed. The man being held up by Julie was a withered husk, his skin so pale it was almost translucent. "Whoa," Jen breathed. "He did not look like that a minute ago." "My apologies, Jennifer," Paradox wheezed. "It would appear that my powers are nearly depleted." "Then we need to wrap this up fast," Kevin said. "We still require time unbound." "We have her," Midoriya said. "Her name is Eri, and she has the power to rewind living things. She's the only person I know with that kind of power. That's why Vilgax attacked us, right?" "You are correct and not." Paradox smiled weakly. "The power is right, the person is right, but not the universe." Midoriya blinked. "What are you talking about? I thought you knew what you were doing." Paradox sighed, and it sounded like dust escaping a tomb. "As I've said, my powers are severely weakened. What was once clear as day is now muddied." Julie scowled. "You know, if we hadn't spent the last few hours trying to keep people safe, I'd say we just wasted our time." "You did not," Paradox assured her. "I, however, have used up too much of mine." "Please don't tell me we're stuck here," Jen pleaded. Not all of you." Paradox closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like he'd died. "I can only send 6 of you to the Watchtower. Someone will have to stay behind when this world falls." Uraraka, who had been watching until now, tensed. "You said when this world falls, not if." Paradox nodded. "There is no preventing it at this stage. Some of Vilgax's creations have already begun devouring the fundamental energies that hold the universe together. Most worlds that stand against him last less than half a day. The only reason these creatures fight you at all is because Vilgax enjoys cruelty." Midoriya lunged for the ancient man's coat, and only Jen's strong arms kept him from throttling Paradox. "Don't say that. There has to be a way to fix this." "There is," Gwen said quietly. The same way we can fix my Earth, by letting this one die first. Tears welled up in Midoriya's eyes. No, and no, I can't accept that. At that moment, Tagada arrived. His costume was dirty, and he was clearly exhausted, but he remained strong. Sorry I'm late, what'd I miss? Kevin sighed. There's no way to save your world, man. Paradox says that he can only get 6 of us out of here before everyone else dies. Tagada stared, then took a long, shuddering breath. I see. Take everyone else, Midoriya demanded abruptly. I'll stay and try to buy as much time as I can. Maybe the rest of you can figure this out in time. He turned to Uraraka. I'm not leaving you. Now it was Uraraka's turn to tear up. Midoriya had just declared that he was willing to die with her. She took off her helmet, then hugged him as tightly as she could. Then she saw Paradox and Tagada share a look, and knew exactly what was about to happen. The question now was what she would do. I love you, she whispered in Midoriya's ear, and then stepped back. Midoriya had less than a second to be confused, and then Tagada punched him in the back of the head, knocking him out. Uraraka caught him before he hit the floor. You knew that was going to happen, she accused Paradox. The rapidly aging man shrugged. Mirio here is quite skilled, but we need someone like Izuku to finish this mission, and everyone else has their part to play. My job has always been to save people, Tagada added. It may not be 1,000,000 people, like I wanted, but I'd be happy to save one of my friends. We have no idea if we'll succeed, Jen said sadly. Tagada grinned. Hey, I believe in you guys, even Luther. I'm sure you'll do fine. Thank you for the ringing endorsement, Luther said dryly, but still nodded at Tagada. I suppose I should wish you good luck. Uraraka went over to the unconscious Midoriya, gave him a quick kiss, and then looked over at Jen. He's going to be hurt when he wakes up. We'll take care of him, Jen promised, and took Midoriya in her arms. She then rolled her eyes at Tagada. I can't believe I'm gonna echo Luther, but yeah, good luck. A moment later, there was a flash of light, and then the 6 of them were gone. Paradox, however, remained behind. I figured you'd be helping them the rest of the way, Tagada said. Paradox shook his head. I'm afraid that saving them took the last of my energy. Mr. Constantine will guide them to their future destinations. What will happen to you? I'm not completely sure, Paradox admitted, even as his body started to fade away. I've seen the beginning and the end, experienced eternity, but I've never looked to see the end of my own story. How intriguing. With those final words, Paradox vanished, leaving only his white coat behind. Tagada closed his eyes for a moment, then turned to Uraraka. Go tell your class. I'll tell mine. Uraraka sniffed, then wiped away tears. Did we do the right thing? Hey, saving the multiverse is way beyond me, but Izuku, that guy's exactly who we need. Tagada laughed softly, but we sent him away. Irony is weird, huh? The sound of shattering glass, followed by screams and sounds of fighting, made them tense. Once more into the breach, Uraraka offered, then put her helmet back on. Yeah, let's go. The 2 of them charged into battle, just in time for the world to end. Julie idly swung her legs as she sat on a crate. How long has he been in there? Kevin shrugged. A few hours, I think. He hasn't left. Not as far as I know. Julie sighed. He needs this. He needs to grieve. We haven't, Kevin pointed out. And that's probably not healthy, Julie admitted. But I think Izuku has been thinking of what happened to our Earth for a while, and he didn't want the same thing to happen to his. Now it has. Kevin closed his eyes and leaned back. Yeah, I can see why he's like this. Jen should be with him, Julie continued. I think she was talking to her dad. She was telling him what happened. Kevin nodded. Have you seen him yet? No, I'm pretty sure I couldn't handle it. Same. Kevin sighed. Where's Gwen? Still guarding Luther. Last time I checked, but I think she's doing it because it's quiet. Julie hesitated. She lost another piece of skin. Jen mentioned that Verdona is alive here, so maybe she can help. Kevin opened his eyes and gave her a look. You don't want to see this world's Ben, and you want Gwen to see this world's version of her grandma. Julie winced. Good point, but I'm getting worried about her. Yeah, so am I. Kevin weakly punched the floor. And now we've lost Paradox. What are we going to do? Honestly, Julie raised her hand to wipe her eyes. I have no idea. You're a smart guy, Luther, Gwen said, arms crossed. How bad are things now? Luther, who had been staring at a computer for hours, chuckled humorlessly. Getting worse by the minute. Every time I scan the multiverse, the number of Earths I find are fewer. Even worlds I specifically know the locations of, worlds I spent months studying, have vanished. I thought disrupting Vilgax's factory would slow him down, but I was wrong. If anything, the destruction has intensified. How is that possible? I can think of 3 immediate answers. First, that I was wrong about Vilgax having only one facility, and he has simply ramped up production in the others. Second, that Vilgax is destroying these universes personally, which indicates just how powerful he's become. Third, Luther pinched the bridge of his nose. The third possibility is that no one is deliberately destroying those universes. Instead, the multiverse has taken so much damage that it's starting to break down on its own. The laws of reality are beginning to fall apart, and multiversal constants are failing. Like time and space, Gwen guessed. That would explain what happened to Paradox. Yes, his state of being was directly tied to the very concept of time. Without that constancy, there was nothing holding him together. Gwen was silent for a moment. Why can't I feel anything? I know I should feel terrified, sad, angry, something. But I don't. I can't say I've had many opportunities to study anodites, but I imagine that you are undergoing a drastic transformation. Between that and the stress you've been through over the last few days, it wouldn't surprise me if your brain shut down your emotions as a way to defend itself. So I'm a sociopath. Doubtful. It would be more appropriate to say that you've reached your limit, emotionally speaking, and can't take more. From what I've observed, your 2 friends are going through something similar. If anything, you should be grateful. In the short term, this will help you get through this. Gwen shrugged. I guess that's something. You should be more concerned with the other boy, Luther continued. You've had a few days to process your loss. He's had only a few hours. Oh, right? Gwen grimaced. Yeah, he's probably not doing well. They're dead. Everyone is dead. I failed. Midoriya couldn't shake the thought from his head, no matter how hard he tried. All he could picture was his friends' deaths, even if he hadn't seen them die. His imagination filled in the blanks. Ida, bleeding out after getting his legs torn off when he'd tried one too many kicks. Sui, devoured by a giant monster while trying to escape. Zero, watching in horror as his girlfriend died, and following soon after. Todoroki, driven to a frenzy to avenge Ishido, either freezing or burning himself to death. Yaoyorozu, lying helpless before the oncoming horde because she'd run out of lipids trying to make more defenses. Ishido, well, he knew how she'd died. Uraraka, putting herself between a crowd of monsters and Eri. Midoriya sobbed again. His friends, his teachers, his parents, God, he hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye to his family. The door to the rust bucket opened, and Jen stepped inside. Hey, cousin. Midoriya didn't answer. He stayed where he'd been for hours, his knees pulled up to his chest, and his face buried in his arms. Jen sat next to him, and was quiet for several long minutes. You and Dad are more alike than you think. You both jump right into situations without thinking, for one. She gently put her arm around Midoriya's shoulders. And you've lost your families to the same person. Believe me, if anyone knows what you're going through, it's Dad. I should have stayed, Midoriya whispered. That's crap, and you know it. Even if you'd saved your school, the entire universe would have been destroyed. I abandoned everyone I love. No, they saved you so that you could save them. And I failed. We all failed. Paradox said that Eri wasn't the one we were looking for after all. Jen felt Midoriya shaking, and held him a little tighter. I know, we're running out of time, and that's why we need you, Izuku. We need that big brain of yours, because Lord knows I don't trust Luthers. For a moment, Midoriya was absolutely still, and Jen wondered if he'd fallen asleep. She turned her head, and saw him staring at her with wide eyes. We're running out of time, he echoed. Yes, Midoriya blinked once, twice, then shot to his feet. Time? Jen raised an eyebrow. What's going through your head, dude? Midoriya began to pace. We're looking for Time Unbound, but Paradox said that we were wrong. We had the right person, but not the right. He stopped, then turned to Jen. I need to talk to Luther. Get the others, and the crown and the mask, hurry. Before Jen could question him, Midoriya turned into XLR8 and dashed out of the rust bucket. He ran to the lab Luther had claimed as his domain, but didn't say anything until Jen arrived with the crown and the mask in her hands, as well as Julie and Kevin. Okay, what the heck is going on? Kevin asked. No idea, Jen admitted. Izuku might, though. Midoriya pointed to the items they'd recovered. How come we had to get these specific things? The multiverse is infinite, right? That means that if we'd failed to get these, we could have gone to any other universe and gotten the same items. But Paradox told us that failure wasn't an option. We had to get these things from specific universes. But why? Gwen shrugged. I don't know, Paradox's was weird. Midoriya shook his head. No, that's not good enough. There has to be a reason. Luther, have you inspected the mask or crown at all? Actually, I haven't, Luther admitted. Paradox had me investigating other matters. But you might be onto something. Luther took a scanner off his workbench and ran it over the crown, then the mask. A moment later, he smiled. Of course, he said. They're emitting a frequency that's perfectly matched. Is that weird? Julie asked. Two items from completely different universes, both with perfectly identical frequencies. Luther scoffed. The odds of that happening without any kind of connection are astronomical, even when taking the infinite nature of the multiverse into account. You don't have to be a dick about it, Jen muttered. Midoriya ignored her. So, if the crown and the mask have the same kind of frequency, wouldn't it make sense if the correct time unbound also had that frequency? It does stand to reason. Luther turned back to his computer and furiously typed away. I've got it. I've located the universe we need to visit. Midoriya grinned. It was wild and a little manic, but he felt something he thought he never would again. Hope. Bellwood then fell on his back, narrowly avoiding the talon that would have cut his head off. He rolled to the side to dodge again, and hissed in pain when he wasn't quite as fast the second time. Before the abomination with too many joints, claws, and teeth to be natural could strike again, it was hit by 5 different colored beams of energy and destroyed. Thanks, Ben said to his girlfriends, and painfully rose to his feet. No problem, Ben, Apache said with a grin, but her usual arrogance was forced. Are you okay? Ben grimaced as he felt the wound on his back slowly close up. Let's just say that I'm really glad I heal fast. We've lost contact with Ichigo's team, Harable said. She was the most composed out of all of them, but they all knew she was worried. Urahara said something about fighting their way to Soul Society when his call was cut off. We'll try to join them once we're done here. Ben tried not to wince when another building collapsed. Bellwood's a mess. Neliel, did Kevin evacuate the family? The former Tercera Espada nodded. I saw him taking them off the planet before I was attacked, but I'm sure they're safe. Good, that's. Ben ran his fingers through his hair. That's something, I guess. At least these things can be killed, right? Mila Rose grinned and spun her sword. It's not like we're out of options. Apache laughed. Yeah, we've got this. Sung Sun huffed behind her sleeve. As much as I hate to agree with the gorilla and the fool, we are holding our own. What do you call us? The other 2 members of the Tres Bestias shouted. Enough, Harable said sternly, and her former subordinates snapped to attention. There are more enemies approaching. Ben, what would be our best option? Ben heard a now familiar shattering sound directly above them. First thing would be to move. Apache looked up at the breach in the sky and the thousands of monsters that poured from it. What was that about holding our own? Sung Sun. Oh, shut up. Neliel swallowed. We're not going to make it out of this, are we? Only if we give up. Ben smiled at them all, then raised the Ultimatrix. Once more, with feeling, it's hero time. Midoriya Izuku was not having a good day. In fact, this was turning out to be one of the worst days he'd had in a long time. It might also be his last day, but he tried not to think about that too hard. Deku, move your ass. Alright, sorry, Kaken. One for all filled his body, the 20% he could reliably use, at any rate, and kicked out. St. Louis smash. The thing that walked on 2 arms he was fighting finally stopped shrieking when Midoriya's foot caved in its skull. When this strange invasion had started a few hours ago, Midoriya had thought it was an army of Nomus, sent by Shigaraki to finish what he'd started at the USJ. But these creatures radiated a sense of wrongness that no Namu had produced before, and Nomus tended to regenerate, while these things looked like they were rotting before his eyes. Despite that, they were strong, and there were so damn many of them. Midoriya, bakugou, Aizawa shouted to be heard over the fighting. Whatever these things were, they were immune to his quirk, so he'd become a field commander rather than a fighter. The next level of defenses is ready. Fall back. Bakugou launched himself into the air with a twin explosion, then rocketed over to the barricade. Midoriya needed an extra kick off the ceiling to get the same kind of momentum, but was still only a heartbeat behind Bakugou. Good job, Aizawa muttered. That bought us a few more minutes. We've just got to hold out until the other heroes fight their way into the school. And how much longer is that gonna take? Bakugou demanded. Aizawa shrugged. I have no idea. Until then, we're falling back to Gym Alpha. You 2 are with me. We'll link up with Present Mike's team on the way. Midoriya was eager to do just that. More than a few of his classmates were in the other teacher's team, and he was getting worried about them. He and Bakugou followed after Aizawa down hallways that, until a few hours ago, had been packed with students going about their daily lives. Seeing those same hallways empty and cracked from constant shaking bothered him in a way he couldn't describe. Fortunately, they found Present Mike and his team unharmed. Midoriya shared a tired wave with Ishido, Todoroki, and Gyro. How did it go? Aizawa asked brusquely. Not too bad, the other teacher said, his usual enthusiasm masking the anxiety he had to be feeling. We brought the party to those freaks from a nice, safe distance. Ishido beamed. Yep, these guys were so good, I only had to use my acid on one of those monsters. Todoroki hardly seemed bothered, which was typical for him, but Gyro looked smug. Yeah, we rocked that show. The moment was ruined when the building rocked violently to one side, and with a deafening noise, the ceiling was ripped away by a massive arm. Midoriya heard someone scream and couldn't be sure it wasn't him. He had seen the owner of that arm earlier in the day, but it had been drawn away from the school by a team of heroes. To see it here meant that it had decided to ignore those heroes or it had killed them. Drive it back, Aizawa shouted. Midoriya raised his arms and charged up one for all. Air force, air pressure bullets punched into the enormous hand, as did a wave of acid, explosions, and spikes of ice. The attacks tore small chunks of flesh from the arm, which was discouraging, but it still receded through the hole it had made. Oh, thank everything, Ishido sighed. As Midoriya looked around, is everyone okay? No, Aizawa said curtly, and held a bleeding body in his arms. Gyro is hurt. Let's get her to recovery, girl. Midoriya felt his stomach drop when he saw blood trickling down Gyro's forehead. She had taken a piece of debris to her head when the ceiling had collapsed. He and Gyro weren't exactly close, but she was a member of his class, and he cared about all of them. Todoroki-san, can you prop up the debris with your ice? He asked. Maybe we can make a tunnel out of here. Todoroki nodded. Good idea. Give me a minute. Hey, extras. Bakugou pointed up. I don't think we were the ones who drove that bastard back. Midoriya peered through the hole and saw the giant monster flailing about, trying to hit a much smaller target that flew around it, while blasting waves of fire. Is that Endeavor? He asked. Todoroki paused for a moment. No, he's in Kyushu right now. There's no way he made it here so fast. Midoriya frowned as he tried to recall all the heroes he knew about with fire-based quirks. He started mumbling under his breath, only for Bakugou to shove him forward. Icy Hot made the stupid tunnel. Deku, get moving. Alright, sorry. After a few more minutes of walking, the two teams made their way to Gym Alpha, which the rest of the teachers and Hero Course students had turned into their main base. Aizawa handed Gyro off to Recovery Girl, then made his way over to Nezu to make his report. Deku-kun, are you guys okay? Uraraka asked as she and Ida jogged over. Yeah, we're fine, Uraraka-san, Midoriya said. I think Gyro-san only has a concussion. Her injuries didn't look that serious. Uraraka sighed. That's a relief. Midoriya nodded. Honestly, it was a minor miracle that nobody in UA had been seriously hurt. There were a few fractures and sprains among the general studies students during the initial attack, but the Hero Course students had been remarkably lucky. None of their injuries were bad enough to take them off the front lines for more than a few minutes, thanks to Recovery Girl. As if the universe heard him, the gym shook. There were screams as something broke through the ceiling and crashed to the floor. Midoriya nearly let out Black Whip from the suddenness of what had happened. Instead, he grabbed the nearest student and jumped away from the falling debris. If it hadn't felt like the world was ending, he would have been profoundly embarrassed to know that he was carrying Uraraka bridal style. It wasn't simple structural instability that had caused the ceiling to collapse. One of the monsters, the kind that walked on its hands, had cushioned the fall of the person who proceeded to kill it with one savage stomp. She was a girl, not much taller than Midoriya, in a red bodysuit that had a blue upside-down omega on the chest. She had shoulder-length brown hair and a red gauntlet around her left wrist. Sorry to drop in like this, the girl said in English, but I wasn't sure where to take this garbage. She looked up and brought her hands to her mouth. Guys, the party is down here. 4 more people dropped down from the hole in the ceiling. 2, a girl around Midoriya's age, and an old man wore hulking suits of armor that they used to fly. There was also a teenage boy with black hair that rode on a translucent platform of pink energy, projected by a red-haired girl who seemed to be partially made of that same energy. The brunette girl frowned. Where the hell is Izuku? Midoriya started, and then raised his hand. Me. The girl looked at him and laughed tiredly. Not you. The other one. Before Midoriya could apologize, the ceiling broke again. This time, however, half of the far wall went with it. The giant monster, a vaguely humanoid thing with bruised blue skin and bony spikes coming out of its shoulders, crashed to the ground. Standing on top of its head was a humanoid tiger, who was in the process of punching the thing's skull into mush. I think it's dead, Midoriya said uneasily. Yeah, so do I, the girl said, then cupped her hands around her mouth. Izuku, knock it off. 1 second. The tiger man shouted back, and then continued punching. This is foreign the thing and because ARG. Is he alright? Midoriya asked. He's been better, the girl sighed. He just needs to blow off some steam. After several more minutes of turning the monster's head from a solid to a liquid, the tiger man staggered over to them. He was breathing heavily, but he looked just a little less angry. Okay, I'm done, he said, and then Midoriya shielded his eyes from a flash of green light. When it faded, Midoriya wasn't the only one who was staring. His costume was different, and his eyes even more so, but there was no mistaking who they were looking at. I guess we need to explain a few things, a second Midoriya Izuku said. It felt like hours, but Midoriya knew that only 20 minutes had passed while he had given his story to his counterpart. He put more effort into keeping his eyes locked with the other Izuku, eyes that had never been changed, and not glancing at the faces of people he knew were dead in his own universe. Even so, he couldn't help but notice some differences between them and his friends. There was no closeness between Asui and Shiro, nor Todoroki and Ishido. Had they not started dating in this universe? Had they even gotten to know each other well enough to think about it? Ida stood apart from most of the students and was just trying to corral them during his story. There was no watchful eye over his counterpart that Midoriya knew his Ida tried to hide. Yaoyorozu was still holding herself in that way she used to do when she was less confident. That had completely faded after the raid on the 8 precepts. Maybe this Momo hadn't fought on the front lines during that mission, or maybe hadn't been there at all. And Uraraka, she stood near his counterpart, but there were no subtle nudges to remind him that she was there. Her right arm was still flesh and blood, and she wasn't trying to slip that hand into her boyfriend's left. As much as it hurt to see, Midoriya didn't think that she and his counterpart were dating. The worst part was that, where the rising stars were as close as family, and would have grouped up to support Midoriya as he was confronted with such monumental information, there was just nothing. Maybe his counterpart didn't have that level of friendship with them, or maybe the rising stars hadn't formed at all. That hurt more than he could bear, so he focused all his attention on his counterpart's eyes. So, anyway, that's what's going on, he said, using all his willpower to sound emotionless. My world, my whole universe, is gone. The best chance we have of fixing it is here. That's... The other Izuku scratched the back of his head. That's a lot to take in. The other Uraraka raised her hand. I have a question. Yes, don't look at her face. Whatever you do, don't look at her face. How come you and Deku have different quirks? Midoriya sighed, and pulled back his sleeve to show the OMNITRIX. I got this a while back. It lets me turn into aliens. Every universe is different, so I'm going to assume that you got one for all. Other Izuku flinched. How do you? In my universe, Mirio got it after Sir Night-Eye convinced All Might he was a worthy successor. Midoriya noticed another flinch. What happened? Sir Night-Eye is dead, other Izuku said. And Tagada-san lost his quirk when he got shot by a quirk-destroying bullet. It happened during the raid on the 8 precepts. Now it was Midoriya's turn to be surprised. Oh, that didn't happen with me. What's one for all? Ishido asked, and it made Midoriya's heart clench to see her, even if it wasn't the girl who called herself his twin, alive and intact. We literally do not have time to explain every detail, Luther cut in. You survived the first wave of Vilgax's monsters, but their numbers are nearly infinite. Sooner or later, this universe will be destroyed. Bakugou scoffed. We killed those freaks easy enough. Really? Luther glanced back at the crater made by the giant monster's corpse. And I suppose you were just humoring that one, making it feel good about itself before you crushed it. Oh, wait, we dealt with it, not you. For a moment, Bakugou seemed like an angry Pomeranian. Not a human being, but a hand on his head from Aizawa kept him from saying anything. If you're so convinced that the entire universe is doomed, why are you here? Julie sighed. Again, time is kind of a factor here. In more ways than one, Kevin cut in. Julie ignored him. So to keep things short, there's someone on this earth who can help us fix this mess. We really only helped out because our Izuku, needed to blow off some steam. You guys were fighting just as hard as I was, Midoriya said, but he was too drained to sound more than a little accusatory. True, Julie admitted. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good every time we killed one of those monsters. Other Izuku raised his hand. I'm sorry, but who are you looking for? A pro hero, right? Maybe someone like Endeavor or Hawks, or maybe someone with a more subtle quirk. So this is what it's like to be on the other side of that, Midoriya thought. It's even more awkward than I thought it was. It's not a pro hero, he interrupted. We need a re. Midoriya watched with mild fascination at the counterparts' reactions, like a switch had been thrown. They all went from confused, scared, and intrigued to suspicious and hostile. It seemed that this Class 1 was as fiercely protective of Eri as his own class had been. What do you want with a 6-year-old girl? Uraraka almost snarled at him, and, wow, did that hurt more than Midoriya expected. We're not entirely sure, Gwen admitted with a sigh. All we know is that we can't do this without her, and we're supposed to take your word on that. Aizawa asked. You can't be serious. Most of the time, I'm not, Kevin said. This time, we're all very serious. And since time is not on our side, Luther added, we won't be able to convince you. so we'll be taking the child with us. Like hell you are, other Izuku shouted, much to his classmates' surprise. To be fair, if I was in his position, I'd be just as angry, Midoriya admitted to himself. Wait, why are you telling us this? Yaoyorozu asked. You could have just taken her while we were busy fighting. We could have, Midoriya said, and this time, he had to look her in the eye, because she was wearing the first version of her costume, and looking anywhere else would have felt wrong. It still hurt, though. But, like Julie said, we needed to blow off some steam. And talking to you made this whole operation easier, Gwen said. Haven't you noticed that someone isn't here? Aizawa looked over the group, and his eyes went wide. You clever bastards. Midoriya almost laughed. From you, Aizawa-sensei, I'll take that as a compliment. Hey, is this room taken? Jen smiled as she opened the door. Oh, it is. Hi, I'm Gen Tennyson. Tagata stood up from his seat. He tried to smile back, but there was a wariness there that Jen hadn't seen in the young man she'd known. Hi, I'm Tagata Mirio, and this is Eri. Jen hadn't gotten to know the Eri from her Midoriya's universe, and wasn't that a confusing thought, but she could see that the little girl was more timid than the one who had basically been adopted by Midoriya and Uraraka. Still, she waved shyly from behind a chair. Hello, Eri said softly. Don't worry, I'm one of the good guys, Jen said, though, considering what she was about to do, she certainly didn't feel like it. Things are kinda scary right now, aren't they? Yeah, Tagata said, and Jen noticed how he was subtly trying to put himself between her and Eri. All those big monsters running around is kinda crazy. That's why I'm here, Jen said. My friends and I figured out how to stop all the monsters and save the day. We just needed to come here and get one last piece of the puzzle. Tagata blinked. Oh, you and your friends are heroes. Well, most of us are. But things are bad enough that we have to work with people we really don't like. Jen shrugged. Anyway, we were following the clues, and they brought us here. To you, actually. Me. Tagata scratched his head. But I don't even have my quirk anymore. I wasn't talking to you, Mirio. Jen knelt so that she could look Eri in the eye. I was talking to her. Eri pointed to herself. But what can I do? We're not really sure, Jen admitted. But you're the only person in the whole world who can make all the bad monsters go away. So I need you to come with me, and... Tagata grabbed her by the shoulder. Whoa, hold on. I'm not about to let Eri go off with some strangers, just because you say so. Jen sighed. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Tagata might not have had his quirk, but he still had well-honed reflexes, and started moving almost before Jen did. But she could move with super speed, and he couldn't, so he was unable to avoid the finger that jabbed into a pressure point, and he fell limp. Jen caught him before he hit the ground, and turned to Eri. He's okay, she said to the scared little girl, as serious as she'd ever been. I won't hurt you, and as soon as we're done saving everyone, we will bring you right back here. I promise. Jen wasn't sure what this Eri had gone through, but whether it was her words, or the conviction with which she spoke them, Eri nodded. Okay, and no, Jen sighed when Tagata managed to crawl over and grab her ankle. You're not taking her. Look, I really don't want to hurt you, but you're being stubborn. Jen knelt and drew back her fist to knock out the stubborn boy. Hey, Mirio, we brought snacks for you and Eri. The door slid open, and Amajiki and Hado walked in. They froze when they saw what Jen was about to do. Jen sighed again. Okay, this is exactly what it looks like. Gwen nailed Aizawa in the face with a blast of mana that got him to close his eyes long enough for Midoriya to turn into forearms and hit his teacher's counterpart hard enough to knock him out. They had discussed this before arriving in this universe. They weren't sure what the rules were regarding the origins of quirks, so they couldn't be sure if Aizawa could erase Midoriya's aliens or not. Rather than take chances, they needed to drop him first. The next target was Midoriya's own counterpart. That hadn't specifically been part of the plan, but he had warned his teammates about the dangers of whoever wielded one for all. Luther blasted the other Midoriya in the chest with his cannons, without his quirk active to soften the blow. He was winded and out of the fight, at least for a few precious minutes. The two final dangers for the operation were bakugou and todoroki. Fortunately, Julie's armor could blast apart the ice and withstand the fire of the latter, and Kevin had the former's number. He absorbed a layer of stone, and then covered that in another layer of steel. The two levels of protection were enough to power through Bakugou's explosions. He grabbed Bakugou by one arm and slammed him into the ground hard enough to crack the floor. To his credit, Bakugou didn't stop fighting until Kevin punched him 7 more times in the face. Where the heck is Jen? Kevin shouted. I don't want to fight an army of superheroes today if I can help it. Sorry I'm late. As if the multiverse was finally cutting them a break, Jen crashed through a wall. She was at her full size, with Eri clutched in one hand. Her other hand was busy swatting Hado into the floor. Had a few unexpected snags to deal with. Fourarms tried not to wince when he saw Eri, It was too easy to forget that this wasn't his Eri, the girl he'd practically adopted, that he'd gone to war against an entire criminal organization to save. The girl that no longer existed. "We're done here," he said, his voice hollow. "Constantine, bring us home." The last thing Midoriya saw of this universe was his counterpart charging forward, one for all at full power. There was determination on his face, but also despair, because he knew he wouldn't be able to save Eri from someone who had his face. He tried not to think about the pain he'd inflicted on people who should have been his friends. He failed. Well, mission accomplished, kiddos. Constantine wiped his hands, then reached into his coat to draw out a flask. "I'm gonna get drunk, and then I'm gonna see how the girl and the stuff you stole will save the multiverse. Let me know when you lot need me to send you off again." "Thanks," Kevin grunted, and shuffled over to the stack of crates he'd claimed days ago as a makeshift bed. Midoriya had asked him why he didn't sleep inside the rust bucket. Kevin had replied that the only places he could sleep were the cockpit, which was uncomfortable, were claimed by the girls, or had been occupied by Ben. After that, Midoriya had wisely decided to leave Kevin alone. "Hey, Izuku." Midoriya turned to face Jen, and tried not to look Eri in the eye. "I'm gonna help the kid settle in. Can you see if Luther has a timetable yet? And think about bringing Gwen, just in case Luther starts mouthing off and you need him teleported into the sun." "I'll keep that in mind." Honestly, Midoriya had heard so many insults to Luther that he had grown numb to it all by now. And he didn't have enough energy to care about anything other than the mission. Midoriya headed over to his own little corner of the hangar for a moment to decompress. He tossed his hoodie and visor onto a crate and rubbed at his eyes until they were sore. The last 2 days had been one emotional gut punch after another. Losing his entire universe, and then being forced to interact with their counterparts was giving him mental and emotional whiplash. He slapped himself a few times. "Come on, focus. We've got the last piece of the puzzle, so I can't drop the ball when we're so close to bringing everyone back." Midoriya didn't bother to put his entire costume back on, and just headed for Luther's lab. This entire section of the Watchtower had been cleared out since the mission had begun, though the occasional Leaguer and Titan would drop by. Usually, they were only delivering food or needed supplies, but they would sometimes ask if the team needed extra help. They were denied each time, usually by Constantine. He said that the multiverse had chosen its champions, and it would be a bad idea to throw a wrench into plans like that. Luther was already out of his armor and sipping a cup of coffee when Midoriya arrived in the lab, and had a particularly disgruntled look on his face. "Is something wrong?" Midoriya asked. Luther scoffed. "A few decades ago, I was one of the wealthiest men on the planet. A single cup of the coffee I drank daily was worth more than some people made in a month. Compared to that, this is utter garbage." "I wouldn't know," Midoriya said. "I prefer tea. I also had expensive teas." "Okay, that I know. A friend of mine is rich, and she insisted we all have the best teas." Luther chuckled. "So, you can be a little self-indulgent. I was beginning to think you were selfless to a fault." Midoriya moved his seat closer, then scrunched up his nose when he smelled Luther's coffee. While it was true that he didn't drink it, he smelled it almost every day when Aizawa entered the classroom. The man might have looked like a scruffy hobo, but he appreciated good coffee. Compared to what Aizawa drank, Luther was right. His coffee was crap. "How bad are things now?" Luther sighed and tapped at his computer. "At this point, we have maybe 24 hours before Vilgax doesn't have to destroy universes himself. The destructive resonance will be irreversible. Do you think Vilgax will come here? Perhaps before the very end?" Luther closed his eyes for a moment. "We know he hates this universe's BEN10, and facing him after ensuring his total victory is the smart thing to do. Please don't praise him. He killed all of my friends." Midoriya sighed. "So, we have 1 day before the end of everything. That kind of puts things in perspective." "I suppose it does." Luther shrugged. "I'd suggest you say your goodbyes to your loved ones, but I don't think you have any left. I'd rather say hello after we bring them all back." "That's assuming that's what will happen," Luther warned. "We are pinning our hopes on a prophecy, mystical artifacts, and a traumatized girl who can't even control her powers. I prefer to have more reliable resources when beginning a project." "Well, that's all we have," Midoriya argued. "At this point, we don't have time for a better plan." "I think Vilgax knows this," Luther said. "There's a good chance that he is aware of what we have, and has a better idea of how we want to use them. Which means we have to be careful," Midoriya said, not quite agreeing with Luther, and sighed. "I just wish we knew how powerful Vilgax himself is." "I asked Gwen and Kevin, and all they said was that nothing they had in their universe could stop him." "That does make things more difficult." Luther leaned back in his chair. "When I was trying to destroy Superman, I would spend weeks, or even months, analyzing every scrap of information. Every time he displayed a new level of power, I would work on how best to counter it. Of course, none of my plans succeeded. I found that he was either holding back, or someone would come to help him. Midoriya nodded. For most of his life, he had studied heroes and their quirks. By that logic, he had also studied their weaknesses, as much as he wanted to deny it. If he really wanted to, he knew he had an alien that would let him dismantle hundreds of different heroes. This time, there was nothing to study. They could only hope that Vilgax could be beaten at all. I'll let the others know that we have less than 24 hours, he said, and rose to his feet. Tell me if anything changes, okay. Lothar just waved him off and resumed drinking his coffee. See if you can't get something decent down here while you're at it. Kevin took a deep breath. So, 24 hours, huh? Less than that, Midoriya clarified. If we cut things too close, Vilgax has a better chance of beating us. Gwen's glowing eye flickered for a moment. Did Constantine figure out what we need to do? Just that we need all three. Jen glanced at Eri, now asleep on a pile of blankets. Elements of the ritual. He'll take care of the rest as soon as he figures out where we need to go, because we can't just do this here, apparently. Kevin scoffed. Yeah, because that would be too easy. And how long will it take for Constantine to do his part? Julie asked. A cough from behind her made her jump. She glared at Constantine, who was holding the journal Midoriya and Tagada had found in one hand and a mostly empty bottle in the other. Now, actually, love. Constantine grinned, and Midoriya wrinkled his nose. He could smell the alcohol on the man's breath from here. Wake up the kid, we've got work to do. Jen gently shook Eri to wake her up, while Gwen and Kevin got Lothar. It took the latter a few minutes to get his armor ready, but the entire team was assembled soon enough. Midoriya adjusted his visor and drew up his hood. Okay, Constantine, what next? Constantine took one last swig from his bottle, then tossed it aside and pulled a piece of chalk from inside his coat. Give me a minute, lad. He used the chalk to draw a large circle on the floor, along with symbols that hurt Midoriya's eyes if he stared at them for too long. There were also 9 smaller circles, 7 surrounding 3, with the 3 arranged in a triangle. Alright, here's what's going to happen, Constantine said. First, you champion lot are going to stand on one of the outer circles, doesn't matter where, and I'll be with you as well. Then the girl and the stuff you stole will be in the center, and that'll trigger some mystical ritual, and we're done. Jen asked. Not on your life, love, Constantine said wearily. No, this is just a transportation ritual, with some added enchantments to get us there safely. Get us where? Gwen demanded. Constantine smirked. The beginning of time. Jen was silent for a long moment. Well, we're dead. Midoriya blinked. What? Why? There's a law of reality itself, Jen said. Nobody can see the beginning of time. Don't know why, or who figured it out, but it's the one place even time travelers can't go. Normally, that would be the case, Constantine agreed. But right now, old Vilgax has done us a favor. He's done so much damage to the multiverse that the barriers around the beginning of time are almost totally gone. That sounds bad, Kevin observed. Oh, it definitely is, Constantine said. But the entire Gotham multiverse is falling apart, so it's not like we can break it more. He noticed that Jen, Gwen, and Midoriya were glaring at him. What? Gwen's eyes narrowed, her hands over Eri's ears. Do not swear in front of the child. Constantine sighed. Ugh, you lot are just as bad as Zatanna. I'll take that as a compliment, Jen said. Now, anything else we should know before going to the beginning of freaking time? How should I know? Constantine asked. It's not like I go there on holiday. Eri flinched, but Midoriya took her hand and smiled at her. Don't worry, we'll keep you safe. Oh, okay. With a little more prompting from Constantine, everyone got into their designated spots. Gwen carefully deposited the 2 artifacts near Eri, and then closed her eyes. You okay? Kevin asked, and reached over to take her hand. Just tired, Gwen said. I want to get this over with and go home. I want to see my parents, Grandpa Max, and Ben. Kevin's grip on her hand tightened. Yeah, so do I. Constantine gave everyone a quick onsova to ensure that they were in the right spot, and then began to chant. Midoriya didn't recognize the language, and the OMNITRIX wasn't able to translate, but after a few seconds, a blue barrier appeared around them all, stopping at the edge of the circle. Then the Watchtower vanished, replaced with the empty void of space. Midoriya flailed for a moment. What's going on? How are we not floating away? For that matter, how can we breathe? Jen laughed. Dude, it's magic. Don't try to understand it, or your head will explode. Lothar frowned. Something is wrong. I recognize the stars, but others are missing. Constantine nodded. Yeah, we got out of there just in time. Looks like that domino effect has started to reach our universe. Lex, it's starting to fall apart, even without Vilgax doing anything directly. Jen's brief good humor vanished. Then we don't have much time. Julie tried to smile. Ironic, considering where we're going. Kevin made finger guns at her. The remaining stars stretched and vanished, as Constantine's spell catapulted them far faster than any science could manage. There was a shattering sound, and speed transformed into time. Midoriya swore he could see flashes of history pass before him. Some events he recognized, others were unfamiliar to him, and he wondered if he was seeing the history of every universe at once. Try not to look too hard, Constantine advised. We're passing close to things we were never meant to see. Midoriya took his words to heart and clenched his eyes shut. After what felt like hours, there was a strong jerking sensation in his stomach, and he nearly fell over. He opened his eyes and kept opening them, because his brain couldn't quite register what he was looking at, and forgot to not strain his eyes. What lay before them was a massive hand, made of what seemed to be the void itself, and held within its open palm was a swirling vortex that glowed without an apparent source of light. The longer Midoriya stared at it, the more he felt both drawn and repulsed. Within that vortex was everything he ever wanted to know, yet he also felt that he should never approach it. That's where we're supposed to go, Julie asked, her voice a whisper. Constantine said softly. Behold the beginning of time. Before the Big Bang, before the gods, before reality itself there was this. Even Luther was silent for a moment as he absorbed that. Tell me, Constantine, how does this factor into our plans to stop Vilgax? Constantine grinned. It all comes down to the girl. She has the power to rewind things, right? What we're going to do is get her in contact with Vilgax's personal timeline and rewind that out of existence. That's not how her power works, Midoriya protested as his brain finally started working again. Her quirk only affects living things. Lad, time is alive. Constantine shrugged. Maybe not with blood and bones, but it's alive in its own way, and Eri's power is connected to the very concept of time. It will work, as long as she knows what it is she's trying to rewind. Eri blinked. She didn't understand most of what was being said, only that she needed to use her power on something. How? Constantine pointed to the two artifacts. With those, the mask will help you focus on what you need to do, and the crown will guide you in how to do it. Gwen frowned, echoing Eri here. How? For the love of Constantine held up the journal. It's right here, okay. Written in the blood of crazy people that only a magician can see. Kevin grimaced. Right, because that sounds totally reliable. I'm confused, Julie said. If that's all we need, why are the rest of us here? Shouldn't Eri be able to do this? That much is obvious, Luther replied. If Vilgax was attacking worlds like Midoriya's, then it stands to reason that he knows what we are attempting, and he will try to stop us. Our role is simple. We have to keep that from happening at any cost. And that's what we'll do, Midoriya said grimly. Constantine, bring us in. Constantine sighed. Right, hang on to something. Hang on to what? Gwen demanded. We're floating in the empty void of space. Just try not to puke, girl. Constantine grinned. This might get a little bumpy. With a gesture from Constantine, the entire group rocketed towards the enormous hand. The air began to shake. First it was just a slight tremor, but after a minute, Midoriya felt like a sock in a dryer. I am really glad I didn't eat anything before we left. Kevin groaned when they finally came to a stop. Looks like one of us did, Jen commented, when she saw Constantine vomiting a short distance away. What? You can't take it, John? Constantine glared at her. I'm not hurling because of motion sickness. I'm hurling because I've been drinking for the last few hours. He turned his head and spat. Damn, this is the last time I do something like this with you lot. Are you done? Julie asked pointedly. Where do we go next? How the bloody hell should I know? Constantine demanded. It's not like I have a map of the beginning of bloody time. My job was just to get you here. We have to go there. Everyone froze, then turned to stare at Eri, who was pointing it. Honestly, Midoriya didn't think he could get more surprised, but he was very wrong. Where once there had been a dark void of nothingness, there was now a very familiar doorway. Why is the door to my classroom here? He asked. Jen blinked. That's what you're seeing. I'm seeing the door to my house. This is the beginning of time, and reality itself is starting to come undone, Luther said. It seems that we are all seeing something familiar to us, but performs the same function. It's not a door, Eri said, and Midoriya was a little creeped out at how emotionless she sounded. Okay, then what is it? Kevin asked. Eri stared at him with blank eyes. Home. Julie didn't hide a shudder as Eri slowly made her way to the door. Yeah, nothing freaky about this at all. And now we have another problem, Constantine said, and pointed up to a familiar crack in reality. Looks like Vilgax is coming to crash this party. You lot go after the kid, I'll buy you some time. John, that's suicide, Jen protested. We don't really have much choice, love, Constantine reminded her. You lot are the champions of the multiverse, not me. Besides, if you win, then it won't matter if I get killed, and if you lose, I won't be around to laugh at you. Jen grimaced. Just try to stay alive as long as you can, okay? Glowing symbols appeared and hovered around Constantine's hands. Can't make any promises, Jen. Just if this works, and we save the multiverse, but I don't come back give Z my love, would you? Sure, John. Jen grabbed Midoriya, who looked ready to protest, by the shoulder. Come on, Izuku, John won't be able to hold them off for long. Thanks for the blow to my self-esteem, Jen, Constantine grumbled. Can't hurt what you don't have. Jen shouted over her shoulder as the team ran after Eri. Constantine chuckled, and then turned to face the incoming horde of screaming abominations. Okay, you ugly bastards, who wants to join me in hell? Midoriya did everything in his power not to throw up. Once again, he was abandoning someone he should have been fighting alongside. In all his childhood daydreams of being a hero, he had never even considered leaving someone behind, but this mission had taught him a harsh reality that, sometimes, you can't save everyone. Sometimes, you can only save whoever you can. How do you know where you're going? Kevin asked Eri. I'm not sure, Eri said, her tone completely emotionless. It's like I've always been here. Still kinda freaky, Jen muttered, and tapped Midoriya's shoulder. Did Eri ever act like this? Never, Midoriya muttered back. She might have, if we'd brought her here, but I have a feeling that only this Eri has this connection. The strange doorway had opened up to a series of winding hallways that seemed to shift every time someone blinked. At first, it looked like the stone walls of a castle, then the Watchtower, the halls of UA, and then those of a house. Sometimes, it looked like all of those at once. The hallways also seemed to go in every direction at once, yet Eri seemed to know exactly where she was going. Fascinating, Luther said as they walked. This is a living tapestry of time, specifically, all events that have come before our present. We're not necessarily at the center of all time, just an aspect of it. Gwen raised an eyebrow. What? Time has departments now. Is there a subcommittee that handles mid-morning? Luther didn't rise to the taunt. This is a place mortal minds aren't designed to handle. It's likely that we can only handle this single facet of time. Even then, I wouldn't be surprised if our appointment as the multiverse's champions granted us some kind of protection from the side effects of this place. Jen sighed. I hate to agree with you, Lex, but I can't think of a better explanation right now. Everyone paused when they felt a tremble in the ground, and Jen blinked away tears. That was John making his last stand. We need to hurry. Midoriya knelt by Eri. Are we almost there? Eri nodded. The door isn't far away. Guys, we have a new problem, Jen said, one hand to her ear. John took care of most of the little critters, but there's a big one right on our tail, and I can hear more of those breaches opening up. Then we buy time for Eri to do her thing, Midoriya said, pushing down everything he knew about being a hero in favor of pure rationality. Jen, can you hold off the big one? Considering who it is, I think I'm the only one who can fight him and not die. Jen cracked her knuckles. I'll be right behind you guys. Wait. Luther pulled a small cylinder from a compartment in his armor and handed it to her. If it's who I think it is, you'll need this. It will slow down his healing and give you the best chance possible. Jen took the cylinder, which lengthened into a silver javelin. She hesitated, and then nodded at Luther. Thanks, Lex. Consider this an apology for past transgressions. Luther shrugged. Good luck, Jennifer. Jen watched as the rest of the team hurried off, and then turned to face her opponent. Just before he arrived, she activated her Ultimatrix. Hello, Doomsday, she said as the gray, spiky monster stomped into view. I don't think we've ever met. I'm Superman's niece. Doomsday loomed over her. You'll break like he did. Jen grinned and hefted Luther's weapon. Oh, I won't be the one breaking today. Can Jen beat whoever that is? Julie asked as they ran. Possibly, Luther said. Doomsday was created by Project Cadmus as the ultimate counter to Superman. When I was in their employ, I had plenty of time to study the creature. Even though he was locked in the Phantom Zone, I didn't like the idea of something that powerful running around without any means of control. Cadmus didn't have a way of actually killing him, so I took a crack at it. I never had a chance to test the weapon, but it should level the playing field. So, even odds, Kevin commented. Exactly. Luther's armor began to beep, and he grimaced. Another breach nearby. I'm reading several biosignatures. Midoriya made a snap decision. Kevin, Julie, keep them off us. Gwen, we might need your barriers to keep Eri safe, and we'll need Luther's brain. I'm not exactly sure if there's anything I can absorb here, Kevin admitted. Luther held out his arm. Try this. The metal is from Apocalypse and more durable than anything on Earth. Kevin put his hand on the armor. A moment later, his skin was covered in the same green metal. Nice. Luther sighed. As usual, I'm the reason anything is getting done. Julie rolled her eyes. You know, for a second, I was almost starting to like you. You shouldn't, I'm not a good person. Good luck, Midoriya said to Julie and Kevin. If you can, find Jen before you catch up with us. Will do, kid. Julie smiled. If it matters, I think our Ben would have liked you. That actually does matter. Midoriya smiled weakly. Thanks, Julie. Gwen floated over to Kevin. One last thing. She grabbed him and kissed him. That might have gone on for a while if Luther hadn't pointedly coughed. Just in case. Kevin nodded dumbly. Yeah, just come back, okay. I kinda want to do that again. Only kinda. Gwen smiled impishly, then floated back over to the others. Come on, guys, let's go save the multiverse. Well. Kevin grinned with a humor he didn't feel. Where the heck did Vilgax drag you circus rejects from? Zimbozo sneered and swept his hat off his head. Rejects, my boy, were the opening act. Thumbskull crossed his arms. It's 4-2, kids. You think for 1 second you've got a chance against us? Oh, please. Julie laughed in his face. Ben beat all of you idiots when he was just 10 years old. You're barely a footnote. Frightwig's hair lashed towards her. Just for that, I'm gonna enjoy ripping you apart, little girl. Julie raised an eyebrow, and then her hands transformed into chainsaws, while missile launchers formed around her shoulders. Bring it, freak. Acid spit shambled forward. Drool dripped down his chin, hissing as it hit the unreality of the ground. He didn't speak, and instead vomited a noxious stream of acid at them. Oh, I forgot how gross this guy was, Kevin said as he ducked around the acid. His hand turned into a hammer, which he smashed into the circus freak's jaw. Julie fired a barrage of missiles that sent the other freaks scattering. Yeah, now we have to win, because I do not want these guys to be the last thing I see. This is it. Eri pointed to a simple, almost innocuous door. That's where I need to go. Well, don't stand on ceremony, Luther said. We need to hurry. Eri reached for the doorknob, but she was too short to reach it. Even Luther chuckled when Midoriya had to open the door for her. The key to saving the multiverse, and she's too small to go on most rides at a theme park, Gwen commented, but couldn't help but smile. As soon as the four of them passed through the door, the good humor was replaced by awe. Before them was an empty void, save for a column of light, surrounded by swirling blue energy. It seemed to go on forever, and Midoriya had to force himself not to stare at it. Okay, so what now? He asked. It's the light of the past, Eri said faintly. I need to enter it. Then you'll need these, Luther said, and held out the mask and crown. If we were right, this will help you focus on what you have to do. Midoriya held the mask to Eri's face, while Gwen held the crown over her head. Just before they touched her, they shrank down to fit her perfectly, with even a slot in the mask for her horn. Just as Eri began walking to the light, Luther's armor beeped again. Another breach is forming. Where? Gwen asked. Luther sighed. Right here. The tearing sound that Midoriya had become all too familiar with reached his ears, and a breach appeared in front of him. It was larger than most he had seen, which meant that something very large was about to come through. It's him, Eri whispered. Gwen had once described what Vilgax had become since his return, but seeing him in person was an entirely different matter. He was huge, easily 30 feet tall, with bulging muscles contained by black armor. His hands and feet ended in silver talons, and pulsing red cables spread out to his limbs from a red circle on his chest. It almost looked like a dark reflection of the OMNITRIX dial. Vilgax's face reminded Midoriya of an octopus, but the bulbous cranium and ragged tentacles didn't seem completely there, like a blurry photograph. Only his eyes, glowing a baleful red, didn't flicker in and out of reality. So, these are the multiverse's champions, Vilgax said, in a voice that was simultaneously a sinister hiss and booming roar. A few traumatized children, and an old man who can never make up for his sins. Pathetic. Luther, get Eri to the light. Midoriya turned into Diamond Head and readied himself. We'll hold him off. Good luck, Luther said, and for the first time since Midoriya had met him, he sounded completely sincere. Ah, yes, the boy who wields the Omnitrix in his universe. Vilgax held up one hand, and black fire appeared in his palm. I have killed many of your counterparts. What makes you so special? At the mention of her cousin's murder, Gwen finally snapped. What remained of her skin and clothes vanished, and she fully became an anodite. Vilgax, she roared. I'm going to kill you. Gwen fired a colossal beam of mana, which Vilgax calmly swatted aside like it was nothing. With another scream of rage, Gwen flew in close and punched Vilgax in the face, which did absolutely nothing. Pest, Vilgax said, and punched Gwen in the chest. She rocketed off into the distance, where there was a flash of light. Anodites are somewhat troublesome, but I've locked her in a pocket dimension. That will keep her busy long enough for me to enjoy killing you, boy. Then you're going to be disappointed. Inside, Midoriya was absolutely terrified. This was the monster that had wiped out entire universes in a matter of days. On the other hand, this was also the bastard that had killed everyone Midoriya had ever loved, and he hadn't even had the respect to do it himself. He had just sat back and watched as his army slaughtered everyone. With that in mind, anger won out over fear. With one arm as a giant blade, Diamond had charged. He swung the blade into Vilgax's leg and his entire arm shattered. Vilgax idly flicked the black fire at him. When it hit Diamond Head's leg, the flame began burning him away. Without hesitation, Midoriya turned into swamp fire and tore off his leg before the flames got too far. A wise move, Vilgax said. More than one BEN10 used a similar tactic in the opening stages of our fight. I'm not interested in your critiques. Swampfire went ultimate and blasted Vilgax with the strongest torrent of fire he could manage. Vilgax stepped through the flame like it wasn't even there. You used one of your ridiculous ultimates much earlier than most, he said. 30 years ago, that attack might have actually killed me. BEN10 is usually more restrained. Stop comparing me to him. Ultimate Swampfire grabbed a double fistful of explosive goop and hurled it at Vilgax. I'm not BEN10. My name is Midoriya Izuku. The explosion that followed would have killed almost anyone from Midoriya's Earth. Vilgax, however, emerged from the smoke and idly brushed some dust from his armor. Of course, he continued, BEN10 is also more competent. Stress and fear boiled over, and Ultimate Swampfire couldn't help but let Vilgax's barbs get to him. He screamed in frustration, and attacked again. Just as before, Vilgax walked through his fire, then grabbed his arm and crushed it like dry leaves and hurled him aside. Pathetic, he sneered. I have traveled the multiverse, obtaining power beyond that of gods. I have grown stronger with every universe I've destroyed. And you think you, a cheap knockoff of the only threat to my ascension, could stop me? Midoriya reverted back to Swampfire and regenerated his arm again. No, not really, but I was trying to slow you down. Vilgax's eyes narrowed, and then he began to laugh. Oh, you thought you were being clever, did you? I have many pawns to unleash. The multiverse has its champions, and so do I. A woman in black combat fatigues stepped out of a breach. Despite the small armory she had strapped to her, Luther couldn't help but chuckle. Well, this certainly is a surprise, he said. Of all the misguided fools Vilgax could have chosen, you're the one he sent after me. I'm honestly a little insulted. Don't be, Lex. Mercy Graves calmly loaded a magazine into her rifle. When Vilgax approached me, he knew I'd be the best choice to take you down. Luther almost laughed again. What? Just because he restored your youth? If I recall, the last time you and I met, I put you in the hospital for almost a year, and that was without my armor. Mercy scowled, but quickly composed herself. Oh, I have no intention of fighting you alone, Lex. She snapped her fingers, and a dozen of Vilgax's drones emerged from the breach behind her. And I know the best way to hurt you isn't physical injury, it's just stopping your big plans. Hurting your ego is far more effective and more fun. One of the drones made a dash for Eri. It took a glancing hit from one of Luther's cannons, and then lunged for its target. However, Eri simply held out one hand, and her horn glowed. As soon as the monster touched her, it was rewound out of existence. Of course, Mercy sighed, and then addressed the other drones. Focus on Luther. I'll kill the kid myself. The drones growled and charged, and Luther opened fire. Eri, go. I won't be able to hold them back for long. Eri nodded, and only barely avoided a bullet meant for her head. Come back here, you little brat. Mercy made to go after her, but Luther intercepted her. I don't believe I ever said this to you before. Mercy, you're fired. Luther shot at her with one of his cannons, but a drone latched onto him and tore the weapon off. Come on, Lex, be a good sport and let my new friends tear you apart, Mercy taunted, and aimed at Eri again. Luther smashed a drone's skull in, and then managed to put himself between Eri and the barrage of bullets. Mercy, my dear, I don't think I've ever been a good sport. Luther pressed a button on his arm, and his armor unleashed a pulse of energy that disintegrated the drones attacking him. I've spent enough time studying these creatures to know how to counteract their energies. And I've known you long enough to remember that your armor has limited power, Mercy said, and snapped her fingers again to summon more drones. How long can you keep this up, Elurk? Luther smirked as he pulled his arm back from his throw. Mercy now had an 8-foot spear going through her chest, tipped with a glowing green stone. She coughed out a stream of blood and collapsed. I was saving that kryptonite for Superman, but I suppose I'll be satisfied with using it on you. Luther turned to face the horde of charging drones. Now, who thinks they're big enough to kill Lex Luthor? Eri glanced behind her. Through her enhanced powers, she could see everyone's battles a few seconds after they unfolded. She didn't know any of them, yet she now knew their stories and what was at stake. This was what she was meant for. Thank you, she whispered and stepped into the light. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 16. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.